Thank you. Welcome to Bloomington Common Council, Committee of the Whole. This is our organizational meeting. Would the clerk, today is Wednesday, the 9th of January, 2019. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Ruff. Here. Sturbaum. Here. Chopra.
Here.
Piedmont Smith.
Here, and the mics are not working.
Yeah, I just realized that.
Okay, there.
Should we start again? For
Yeah,
fun? No? Okay, well, I lost track. So Granger?
Present.
Okay, Volin?
Here.
Sandberg?
Here.
Sims?
Here.
Rollo?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So on tonight's agenda, as I said, it's an organizational meeting. So there is some difference that will happen tonight. We have no minutes to approve. We'll have reports by council members and the mayor. No reports tonight. I don't think we have any committee reports, but after that we'll have time for public comment for items not on the agenda. Our next item is election of officers and also council committee assignments and seating chart on the dais. We then have some appointments to boards and commissions, followed by legislation for first reading, Ordinance 19-01 regarding the salaries of some Bloomington employees, Ordinance 19-03 to amend Title 8 regarding historic preservation and protection, Ordinance 19-04 to amend Title 8 entitled Historic Preservation and Protection. We then have legislation for second reading and resolutions, which will include, again, Ordinance 19-01. Following that, we will have additional public comment for items not on the agenda. We may have some council schedule issues. We will adjourn to be followed by a committee of the whole. So what I'm going to do for starting my reports, I'm going to start on my left with Mr. There he is, Mr. Rollo.
Thank you, Madam President. I wasn't preparing anything, but I would like to just say that I think it's important and incumbent on everybody to contact the federal government, their representatives, about the shutdown that's affecting the country. It's affecting predominantly people who are vulnerable in society. And I think it's getting to a critical stage, and it's simply a game. The president is playing a game. If he were serious about it, if he was serious about border security, we would not be talking about a wall, and there are people in Congress who would work with the president. As a matter of fact, it's curious that this whole debate is happening with a new Congress, since the previous Congress, being of one party, could have passed the wall if they had chosen to. The point is that there isn't support. So it is a game, and it's a dangerous game, and it's causing a lot of suffering. I read an article about people in Clay City not being able to cash food stamps, and I imagine that's everywhere it's happening. So I think it's incumbent on government to help people who are vulnerable, and I think it's incumbent on us to do our role as well, but clearly only the federal government can solve this situation. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sims?
Thank you. And if I briefly may, I would just like to acknowledge 105 years ago in 1914, my fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, was founded. It was founded by three gentlemen in Howard University, and it started on the belief that the fraternity should be a vehicle for delivering services to the African American community. Now, when I pledged and became a member, I was actually first semester sophomore here on campus. And many of the organizations that I've been with or been a part of over life have mottos and missions that I think have formed some of the things that I do today. And our motto then, or it still is, I should say, is culture for service and service to humanity. So I just want to acknowledge our founding date. All my fraternity brothers are gathered at BJ's Brew House this evening. If you guys are looking, go mob, and happy anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Amber?
No report, thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Volan?
Yes, I wanted to comment briefly at the start of a new year on an idea I read about recently in Governing Magazine, an article by the former mayor of Kansas City, Missouri. Talks about, the title is "Mobility is Starting to Get the Attention It Deserves." And to summarize it briefly, housing, jobs, and healthcare are three important aspects of any city, but mobility affects all of them. Being able to get around the city to take care of, or to get between housing and jobs to take care of one's health. The city of Pittsburgh, where I was a resident before I moved to Bloomington many years ago, the mayor 5 years ago made mobility one of his top priorities. And they went through a study. They got the Harvard equivalent of SPIA to give them recommendations. And what they recommended was the development of a cabinet-level office on mobility that reports directly to the mayor. Pittsburgh eventually created a Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, which I think is an interesting title. And their goals, I think, are worth quoting, as the author of the article said, because they're so clear, intuitive, and non-technical, are worth quoting verbatim. Pittsburgh has 5 goals for their Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Number 1, that no one dies or is seriously injured traveling on city streets. Sounds like sort of an obvious goal, but not necessarily, because we maybe take for granted the throughput of cars over other priorities. The second goal, that every household in Pittsburgh can access fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel of home without the requirement of a private vehicle. A very interesting goal indeed. The third goal, all trips less than 1 mile should be easily and enjoyably achieved by non-vehicle travel. The fourth goal, streets and intersections can be intuitively navigated by an adolescent. If you ever think about a large, complicated intersection, that's, I think, where that goal comes in. And the last, and to me the most significant goal, is that the combined cost of transportation, housing, and energy does not exceed 45% of household income for any income group. I think these are an interesting set of interlocked goals that Pittsburgh is very wise to be pursuing. I think that these goals set a standard for us to better understand the challenges that we have that defy the silos of individual departments. We've struggled over the years to figure out, well, where should a new task go, who should be in charge of what. But it's only if we start with sort of overarching goals like these that tackling emergent problems between silos makes sense. So anyway, I look forward to, this year we're going to be taking up the UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance, our zoning code. We're going to be revising it for the first time in 13 years. These are the goals that I'll be using when I look at the proposal as it comes to the council. And with that, I want to wish everyone a happy new year, and I hope that we are productive and strong in 2019 as a city council. Thank you.
Thank you. I as well want to wish people a happy new year. I will add peace. I wish peace for us this year. Ms. Piedmont-Smith.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank Councilmember Granger for serving as our president in 2018. It was a difficult year. There were many controversial issues, and she handled them with grace and with intelligence. And as her vice president, I really enjoyed serving alongside her, along with our parliamentarian, Mr. Volan. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for your service. We'll be selecting a new president a little later in the meeting, maybe the same president. But in any case, I wanted to thank her for all of her hard work in 2018.
Ms. Chopra?
Thank you. I wanted to speak quickly this evening on my announcement that I made over the weekend on Sunday that I will not be seeking a second term on council, though I am looking forward to finishing this year strong. We have a lot to do, and I'm looking forward to being totally present with that in the next year. But I wanted to comment that I made the announcement early, I believe, because, I think that it was early, and I did it because I really want to see a robust, competitive, Democratic primary. And specifically, I want to encourage anyone in District 3 who's interested in running to really think about it, most especially if you feel that you're not represented on council right now. If you can look up and see the 9 people, 8 people, whatever you want to look at it, people on council, and say, I don't think I'm properly represented by race or my gender or my sexual orientation or even my political beliefs on council, I really highly encourage you to run. If you can look up there and say, yeah, those people are like me, we're buddies, we're all the same, I discourage you to run. I feel that part of the reason why I ran for city council is because I didn't see myself represented, me and my family represented on council. And I'd be pretty bummed to see, in my mind, council regress in its diversity if I were to step down. So if anyone is interested in running, you don't have to have any special qualifications except for a willingness to work hard and get stuff done. Please do reach out to me. But in the meantime, I look forward to the next year. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to show you this interesting duck. It's a duck. I found it quacking, walking around outside. And I'm bringing it up because we're in a post-truth era where people say things that aren't true. This is a duck. If I tell you it's a duck enough, maybe you will really think it's a duck. But of course, this is a duck. So we are in dangerous territory, and people are saying things that are not connected to reality. And we have to know what a duck is and what a duck isn't. And if somebody wants to give the flat earth people equal time to the round earth people, or the global warming people equal time with the no global warming people, this is the trouble that we're in. So just remember, if it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sturbaum. Mr. Ruff?
No report time, thank you.
Thank you. I believe we have no council committee reports. At this time, we will move to public comment. If you would like to speak, if I could see a show of hands to items not on the agenda. 2.
5 minutes each.
3. Okay.
5 minutes each.
Okay. So please step to the agenda, print your name. Step to the podium, print your name, state your name for the record, and Mr. Volan will be timekeeper. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Greg Alexander. Last time I was here, I heard Alex Crowley suggest that the council needed to subsidize parking because of all the people who have no choice but to live far from downtown because they're too poor. Y'all weren't fooled, right? Cheap parking downtown is mostly to attract suburbanites from the surrounding region. Even though downtown is surrounded by street grid neighborhoods from Elm Heights to Maple Heights, it seems to be assumed that in order to survive, downtown has to compete with the whole region to attract choice traffic from the suburbs. Go ask these people why they choose to live in the suburbs. One of the top 3 reasons is always that they don't want to live near a busy street. The irony, they drive through my front yards that no one will drive through theirs. This naked sense of entitlement is the lifestyle you think you have no choice but to subsidize. But there are people who are so poor they have no choice but to live far away. Take Curry Pike, for example. There's trailer parks, scummy apartments, cheap suburbs, but absolutely no local amenities. The nearby stores are like Lowe's, designed exclusively to service a large region at the expense of their local neighborhood. These are truly people who have no choice but to drive for every single trip. But car ownership is expensive, and poverty takes away even that choice. They have to invent an alternative. Can you imagine how hard up you would have to be to walk on Curry Pike? Do you ever see people walking over there? It's extremely rare. I looked up fatality statistics for Curry Pike. In 35 years of records, I found 7 fatalities. 4 of those were people in cars. 3 of them were pedestrians. 3 out of 7. Are there 3 out of 7 users are pedestrians? No. I don't know how to explain to you how stark that ratio is. Basically, no one walks out there, and still pedestrians make up nearly half of the fatalities. That's appalling. Even though they live out on unwalkable Curry Pike, they found the alternative that Mr. Crowley insisted is impossible. Instead of driving, they die gruesomely under the wheels of a car. What poor people need is not subsidized access to a parking garage 5 miles from their homes. What poor people need is localized services. I'm talking to you, Susan Sandberg. We can begin right here by prioritizing local traffic downtown. The core neighborhoods, including Crestmont, are dense enough and diverse enough to be the backbone for a thriving commercial district. We do not need to destroy walkability for the people that live here just to attract wealthy suburbanites who choose not to. Poverty guarantees a baseline level of walking. You can choose to serve those people, or you can choose to serve people who drive, who respond rationally to incentives that you control. You can decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Please don't forget to sign in. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Daniel Bingham. Trying to have this conversation in 5-minute increments. Public comment's a little absurd, but I will continue. So I'm not going to go back through the stuff I've talked about previously, like the IPCC report and how long we have, 10 years, to respond to climate change. I'm going to talk about sort of the remaining question mark that seemed to be hanging in the wake of those comments, which is what do we do about it? And some of it we talked about related to the parking garage, but there's more we can do than just parking. And before I get there, I had a meeting with Mayor Hamilton over the holiday break and discussed this issue with him. And the position he seemed to take was that we needed to wait for national action on this, was that this was something we couldn't really deal with locally. And I would ask him, what exactly does he think national action is going to look like? It might look like a gas tax. Some people have suggested we need to see $4 a gallon gas again. $4 a gallon gas didn't cut it. We need to get half the cars off the road in 10 years. If we're going to do this through a gas tax, it's going to be $10, $20, $30 a gallon gas. That's what it's going to take, which means people are going to need the infrastructure that allows them to not drive, and they're going to need it fast. But hopefully we don't do it through a gas tax, or if Congress is silly enough to try, they get our equivalent of the Yellow Vest protests. That's what those were in response to, was a regressive gas tax. In which case, it's more likely to take the form of money for us to change our infrastructure. It's going to be expertise to help us change our infrastructure. At the end of the day, we still need to change the infrastructure to allow people to not drive. That is the only choice before us. We can wait 2 years to get the national money, but then we've only got 8 years left to make the move. Or we can start now because we have so little time. After one of the parking garage meetings, I had a brief conversation with Alex Crowley in the hall and pressed him on this. And he pointed to Seattle as the gold standard of handling climate in the US. I would disagree with that characterization, but I would also say that even if Seattle is the gold standard, they're nowhere near where we need to be. The closest on the planet is Copenhagen. They've gotten the number of car trips down to, I think it's 35% of all trips happen by car. The rest are transit, and the vast majority, something like 45 to 50%, are by bike. They did it. They've done it. They've shown that it's possible. But it took them 40 years to get there. We can model our infrastructure off of theirs, and we can start moving now. But we've got a quarter of the time it took them to get half our cars off our streets, or to find ways to subsidize people into electric cars. But to me, that seems a bit of a bigger challenge and folly We're going to be far more effective if we get people out of cars than if we try to get them into electric cars. Transportation is one section. And making the infrastructure changes, we can look to Copenhagen, we can look to what other cities in the US are doing. We can, add bike lanes, we can remove parking to create room for bike lanes and bus lanes, take cars off of streets entirely, except for local traffic. There are a number of cities in Spain that have done this. And again, when cities do this, I'm sure that a lot of businesses here, because they've never encountered this, will say that's going to hurt our bottom line. Where cities have done it, it hasn't hurt the bottom lines. People walking are more likely to window shop. They're more likely to go into a store. It usually helps business. Aside from transportation, we can get creative with how we get people off the coal-fueled electric grid. We did the wholesale solar buy, which is a great first step, but only helps people who have that down payment. We could be just putting solar panels on people's roofs and letting them pay them back through their utility bills. We could fund a program where you apply, you pay no down payment, we buy the solar panels for you and put them on your roof, and then you pay us back through your utility bills. They'll pay back the solar panels over their lives. And we can get the panels on people's roofs, we can get the electricity on the grid, offsetting coal electricity.
30 seconds.
I'm sure there are other approaches we could take. Other cities, Burlington is on 100% renewable. A Republican mayored city recently either made a pledge or made the move to 100% renewable. We can look to these cities to see how they did it, but we have to move. We've got 10 years. And the reality is we've probably got less than that because the IPCC has consistently underestimated what climate change is going to do. If we keep ignoring this, the next generation are the ones who are going to suffer. And they're, a lot of them can't speak for themselves. They're too young to come up here and speak. So we have to do this for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bingham. Was there, oh.
Hi, kids. I'm 70 now. Mark Haggerty. And so I've witnessed this rise to power that I helped begin back in the very earliest 70s. And I see the things that people have brought up tonight bring up some fundamental questions about, does this council really represent this community? I know where y'all live, everybody. And I know we have a lot of people that are from suburbia, and I live here in town. We have a lot of people from IU, but for me, IU is the enemy. They're the big corporation that wants to take over and ruin my downtown, ruin my artist community, turn this into a corporate gentrification that where these rich kids take over what the homeless had 2 years ago. And the homeless are run out by threat. Because if the cops get you tonight, it's really cold, take you into jail, when you get back out, all your stuff's going to be gone. That's all your cooking stuff and everything you need to live. All the stuff you have in the garbage bags. There's so many people out living out here homeless now. Y'all aren't aware of. You all aren't aware of who's in the jail, who we are keeping in the jail, and the conditions that they're under, and really how many people are really in the jail, that we're not responding to this. We've got 5 acres under roof on South Rogers that we could commandeer any time. We don't need to have a criminal justice system that hurts people during this action. We want to reform people. That's what the Constitution says. And we're not doing that here. Our very criminal justice system is not reforming people. It's making people worse when they get out. And it's not treating people. And the more money that my government gets, the worse they do. And they're Democrats. It's been Obama that was sending drones all over the Middle East and everywhere. We've got shooting wars all over. We haven't opposed those things under Obama. I've spoken about those drones and the idea that you can come in here with Winchesters and we have bow and arrows, really stirs up the local population for generations, leaves a cultural trauma on a whole people, and creates this thing we call terrorism that we're so afraid of. We're not addressing that, and I find that the corruption that Donald Trump has brought, and this perversion of the truth, and the people that are willing to believe it, doesn't just happen at the White House. It permeates my very community. Many of the people that voted for Trump voted out of desperation. When I see Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi doing press conferences after this thing, I think, oh my God, what a disaster. What people that cannot represent me at all. Perhaps Cortez or Sanders, but for God's sake, this dying Democratic Party needs some infusion of real ideas and some sort of intimacy. We talk about diversity. The diversity I want to see on this council is economic. I don't care about the race or the gender and stuff like that. Ethnicity is not as important to me as economic diversity, because the people I know are suffering and they're poor. You're my friends, you're my neighbors. I would like to establish some sort of real communication and credibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more public comment, at this time I believe we have a couple of disclosures of conflict of interest.
Madam Chair, I want to disclose a possible conflict under municipal code. At tonight's Committee of the Whole meeting, the Council will discuss Resolution 1902, which is an extension of the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Zone for 5 years. State statute allows certain tax incentives to businesses and residents of enterprise zones, and one of the benefits is that zone residents who also work in the zone for certain employers, including political subdivisions like the city, can receive a state income tax deduction of up to $7,500. Under local code, I wish to declare that I do live in the enterprise zone, and my work as a city council member makes me eligible for this tax deduction. However, my consideration of Resolution 1902 is not going to be shaped by that condition, that circumstance. Instead, I'm going to be considering the resolution through an analysis of the social and economic good that can be realized for businesses and residents of the zone as a whole. For that reason, I can participate fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
And I also wish to declare that I live in the enterprise zone and that my work for the city makes me eligible for the enterprise deduction. However, my consideration of Resolution 1902 is not shaped by this deduction benefit, which has pre-existed before I became a council member. Instead, my consideration and vote will be informed by an analysis of the social and economic good that may be realized for businesses and residents if the zone is renewed in a 5-year period. For that reason, I can participate fairly and objectively and in the public interest. And if you're listening, you should make sure that you take advantage of this tax deduction if you live in the zone.
Thank you. Are there any questions of my colleagues? Can we just do a voice vote, Mr. Sherman, to accept these? And may we just do, okay. All in favor, say aye of accepting the disclosures.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. At this time, we are going to elect officers, and I'm willing to take a nomination.
I'll nominate Mr. Dave Rollo as council president.
Do you want to nominate a slate, or do you just want to?
Sure, I can do that. I'd also like to nominate Dorothy Granger as vice president.
And Steve Owen is parliamentarian.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. So at this time, we're going to take a few minutes and do a little bit of shuffling while we switch seats.
And so is Dorothy. I was gonna switch. Chris wanna switch with me. And I'm gonna be a husband for now, because he drives me crazy. He drives me nuts.
Here you go, dear.
But she really drives me crazy, so.
You're sitting right here.
I love you, that's why you don't drive me crazy, that's why I switch.
Seriously. Fist bump.
Like, one of 4 council members that don't drive me crazy. Check, I gotta fix my crossword. Andy, I've got. Is it tonight? I have it on my calendar. It's always on here. No, we don't play tonight. We play Friday against Maryland. Because see, this is the official IU calendar. Like, they update this calendar. I subscribe to it. So if they play, it's on there. Yeah. Isn't it? It's our backyard. Isn't that awesome?
More like it's at a state park or something.
I feel like I'm camping in Brown County on our backyard.
Looks like there's
Yeah.
state park-ish.
Yeah. I mean, that's our backyard. It's gorgeous. I wish it had, I want to see some snow. Haven't seen it in the snow yet. I'll show you another picture just for fun.
And the Plaid brothers.
Yeah, I don't even like plaid, so we won't discuss that. Let me see, I'll show you. Nah. I mean, yes. No. Yeah, I'm gonna show you a picture of it in the summertime, if I can find it, just so you know what I'm doing.
We're gonna do one each season from the same spot.
I guess we could, but I just wanted to show you because it's really pretty. Oh, here's probably here.
I think you did the same exact spot every season.
That would be cool.
Same picture.
I'm kinda. No, it's not a very good picture. You can see the backyard.
Do the summer solstice, winter solstice, vernal equinox, and autumnal equinox.
Sure. That's the backyard. I mean, it's great.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to re-adjourn the regular session meeting for the Common Council of Bloomington on January 9th, 2019. And first, I'd like to say that the seating chart reflects the preference of the council members this year. And so that was made just earlier today. Before we begin, follow our agenda, I would like to say thank you to our officers of last year. Isabel and Dorothy, you've gotten us through a lot of significant legislation, sometimes difficult, sometimes enjoyable, I think. Yes, enjoyable. And it really took a lot of inclusiveness, care in scheduling, and allowing everyone deliberations and fact-finding. And I think that was very, very helpful to us, and I think I can speak on behalf of the council to thank you. And with regard to that, I baked some cookies. No, they're not cookies. No. Oh, don't open it. It kind of gives it away if you look at the title. But I wrapped it myself, by the way.
Oh, you spelled my name correctly.
So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I would like to thank Dorothy Granger and Steve Olin for staying on in the coming year. So let's move now to council committees appointments.
Mr. President.
Well, I understand that by my action, I'll appoint the following, which is the Jack Hopkins Social Service Funding Committee, which has 5 members. And this year, Allison Chopra, Dorothy Granger, Isabel Piedmont Smith, and Andy Ruff and Susan Sandberg will serve on that committee. Allison Chopra will serve as chair. Council Sidewalk Committee, 4 members, which regards the 2020 funds, the coming year funds. Dorothy Granger will serve as chair. Jim Sims, myself, and Chris Sturbaum will serve. Council Land Use Committee, 4 members. Steve Volan will chair that. Allison Chopra, Chris Sturbaum, and Isabel Piedmont Smith will serve. And the council interview committees for citizen appointments to boards and commissions, I understand, will remain as they have been. Is that the consensus? Very good. Okay. So that takes care of actions by president. So let's move to appointments to various commissions and boards.
Mr. President, I move that Susan Sandberg be named to the Social Services Citizens Advisory Committee for Community Development Block Grants, and that Andy Ruff be named to the Physical Improvements portion of the Citizens Advisory Committee for CDBG.
Second.
Do we do these one at a time, or do we do them all as a slate?
We could do it as a slate, could we not?
Okay,
Let's
I'll
proceed in
continue.
that way. It's more efficient.
The council member to the appointment to the Commission for Bloomington Downtown, Chris Sturbaum, to the Economic Development Commission for the city, Dave Rollo, to the Economic Development Commission for the county, Allison Chopra, to the Environmental Resource Advisory Committee, Dorothy Granger, to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, Andy Ruff, to the Plan Commission, Susan Sandberg, to the Solid Waste Management District, Isabel Piedmont Smith, to the Board of the Urban Enterprise Association, Chris Sturbaum, to the Utilities Service Board ex officio, Jim Sims, to the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation, Jim Sims, to the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability, Dave Rollo, to the Parking Commission, Steve Volan, to the Public Safety Local Income Tax Allocation Committee, Dorothy Granger, Isabel Piedmont Smith, Jim Sims, and Allison Chopra. I look for a second.
Second.
Thank you. So that will be our slate. Is there any discussion? Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Do we need a roll call vote, or can we have a voice vote? Voice vote? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that slate will pass then.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I move appointment of Teddy Maurer to the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability as a reappointment.
Okay.
I have 4 others. Should I do them all together?
Yes, these are reappointments, are they not?
They're reappointments.
Yes.
Yes. I moved for the reappointment of Gavin Everett to the Commission on Hispanic and Latino Affairs. I move reappointment of Shauna Meyer Niederman to the Commission on the Status of Children and Youth. And George Hegeman to the Tree Commission. And finally, Amanda Burnham to the Utilities Service Board.
Thank you. So we've had a motion and a second. All in favor of the appointments, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, congratulations to all those reappointed members.
Mr. Chair, I have some appointments from Team A.
Very good.
Animal Control Commission, we nominate James Shaw.
Microphone, Chris.
Thank you. Animal Control Commission, we nominate James Schultz. Urban Enterprise Association, Matthew Cole. Commission on Aging, Jack Kahn. Housing Quality Appeals Board, Susie Hamilton, Diana Powell Opata. Public Transportation Commission, Alex Cartwright, Kent McDaniel.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, motion's been made and seconded for those appointments. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations to those members, and thanks to Team A.
Mr. President, I have 4 recommendations for reappointment. Mark Stossberg to the Bike and Ped Safety Commission. Seth Debro to the Commission on Status of Black Males. Lindsay Hummel to the Environmental Commission. And James Sanders to the Martin Luther King Jr. Birthday Commission.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Congratulations to those members. Are there any other nominations to boards or commissions? Okay, I think that then concludes item 5, election of officers. Let's move now, and appointments to boards and commissions as well. Let's move to legislation for first reading. Parliamentarian.
Mr. Chair, I move that ordinance 1901 be introduced and read by title and synopsis only.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Will the clerk please read?
Bless you. Ordinance 1901, an ordinance to amend Ordinance 1818, which fixed the salaries of appointed officers, non-union, and AFSCME employees for all the departments of the City of Bloomington, Monroe County, Indiana for the year 2019, regarding to reflect changes due to the execution of a work agreement between the City of Bloomington and Local 2487 CBME AFSCME, and also changes affecting 3 additional job titles. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance amends Ordinance 1818, which sets the maximum salary for all appointed officers, non-union, and AFSCME employees for all the departments of the City of Bloomington, Indiana in 2019. The changes reflect the terms of a new 4-year collective bargaining agreement between the city and AFSCME, and also includes changes affecting 3 additional job titles unrelated to the collective bargaining agreement.
Thank you. Clerk.
Mr. Chair, I move that ordinance 1903 be introduced and read by title and synopsis only.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and second. Will the clerk please read?
Ordinance 1903 to amend Title 8 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Historic Preservation and Protection to establish a historic district regarding the Maple Heights Conservation District, Maple Heights Neighborhood Association petitioner. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance amends the list of designated historic districts in Chapter 8.20 of the City of Bloomington Municipal Code by establishing the Maple Heights Conservation District. In recommending this designation, the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission conducted a survey, held public hearings, and submitted a map and accompanying report to the council. The map sets forth the boundaries of the district and the classification of buildings within the district. The report demonstrates how this district meets the necessary criteria. A conservation district is, in general, less restrictive than a full historic district and requires only the review of proposals to demolish or move buildings or construct new principal or accessory buildings. At the end of 3 years after adoption of this ordinance, this conservation district will elevate into a full historic district unless within 180 and 60 days before that date, a majority of the property owners provide the commission with written objections to the elevation.
Thank you. Clerk Bolden.
Mr. Chair, I move that ordinance 1904 be introduced and read by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please read?
All in favor, say aye.
Oh, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Will the clerk please read?
Ordinance 1904 to amend Title 8 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Historic Preservation and Protection to establish a historic district regarding 1175 South Smith Road Historic District, the Harvey Nelson House. James and Sally Harvey petitioner. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance amends Title 8 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Historic Preservation and Protection in order to designate the Harvey Nelson House, 1175 South Smith Road, as a historic district. James and Sally Harvey sought this action, and after a public hearing on December 13, 2017, the Historic Preservation Commission recommended that the structures be designated historic with a rating as contributing based upon certain historical and architectural criteria set forth in Chapter 8.08 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Historic Districts, Conservation Districts, and Standards. Historic designation of a property under Title 8 provides for the commission or staff to approve a certificate of appropriateness before conspicuous changes to the exterior of sites and structures may be made, and thereby helps assure that the historic significance of property is preserved.
Thank you. That concludes legislation for first reading, and if there are people here who would like to speak to those later, we'll have a committee of the whole following our regular session chaired by Susan Sandberg, and those will be heard at that time. So we'll move now to legislation for second reading and resolutions.
Mr. President, I move that ordinance 1901 be introduced and read by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that ordinance 1901 be introduced and read by the clerk.
Wait a minute. Mr. Chairman, I have to do that first, don't I? I need to move that I move that the council introduce and consider ordinance 1901 for adoption at the same meeting and on the same night as introduced. I need a second.
Second.
Mr. Chairman, it's a 2/3 vote?
For
Or
this
unanimous
motion,
vote?
it requires unanimous consent.
Okay.
And then when it gets to passage, it'll require a two-thirds majority. So unanimous consent at this point in the agenda.
Okay, so we'll need a voice, we'll need a roll call vote for that.
The motion's debatable and amendable.
All right. Okay, has it been seconded?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone have questions or comments on introducing and hearing this item this evening?
This is about the ASME contract?
Yes. Okay. Seeing no, yes. Yes, Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
For the sake of the public, that the reason that we are both introducing and discussing and potentially voting on this matter on the same evening is so that the ASME employees can receive their pay increases with the first payroll of 2019. So that was our reason for rushing this one. But we will talk about it momentarily, of course, and you'll have public comment if this motion passes.
Thank you for that clarification. So, seeing no comment or debate, then we'll call the roll on that motion.
Councilmember Ruff? Yes. Chopra? Yes. Piedmont-Smith?
Yes.
Granger?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Volin?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Sturbaum? Yes. Sandberg? Thank you.
9-0.
Okay, 9-0, it is adopted. So now we'll move to legislation for first reading.
Well, I mean, have I not already?
You've already introduced it.
Introduced
The clerk has not read the synopsis.
Okay.
So let's proceed with that. Well, actually, all in favor of its
No,
introduction?
we've
It was
done that, so she can do it now.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Clerk Bolden.
Ordinance 1901, an ordinance to amend Ordinance 1818, which fixed the salaries of appointed officers, non-union, and AFSCME employees for all the departments of the City of Bloomington, Monroe County, Indiana for the year 2019, regarding to reflect changes due to the execution of a work agreement between the City of Bloomington and Local 2487 CBME AFSCME, and also changes affecting 3 additional job titles. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance amends Ordinance 1818, which set the maximum salary for all appointed officers, non-union, and AFSCME employees for all the departments of the City of Bloomington in 2019. The changes reflect the terms of a new 4-year collective bargaining agreement between the city and AFSCME, and also include changes affecting 3 additional job titles unrelated to the collective bargaining agreement. You do not have a committee recommendation for this one.
Thank you, Clerk.
Good evening, council members. My name is Caroline Shaw. I'm the HR director. And first of all, I'd just like to thank you so much for accommodating us on this AFSCME, primarily in AFSCME changes to our salary ordinance. As you know, we were negotiating a long time last year. The bargaining team from AFSCME and our administrative team worked very hard, and the final contract went to vote with our AFSCME membership in early December. And then I believe the final signature went to the contract on December 26th. So thank you so much for accommodating this. This will allow us to get our employees their pay rates, pay increases in the very first check of 2019, as Councilmember Piedmont-Smith said. I appreciate this very much. So this is a lot to cover. There are a couple of minor changes, so I will go through slowly and happy to answer questions at the end. The first couple of changes are things I'm just slipping in. They're minor changes, but it seemed like an efficient thing to do to add 2 minor changes to this salary ordinance change. And the position of Application Support and Security Specialist, which was formerly a grade 7 position in the ITS department, was modified to better fit the needs of the department, and it was renamed and regraded. It is now the Accounts and Training Specialist, which is a grade 5. And the fiscal impact of that is an actual decrease of $5,702.
Ms. Shaw, if you would hold on just for a second. The President and the Vice and Councilmember Piedmont-Smith are right. We didn't move to adopt, which requires 2/3 vote. I thought that came at the end of the ordinance. We have to move to adopt.
You move to adopt, but your vote takes place at the end of the process.
So that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, but I thought there was a motion. Okay, we just got to get the procedure right. Never mind. Carry on.
This is something we don't normally do. We don't do this very
Yeah.
often, so thank
Yeah.
you all. Okay, so I changed the ITS position, and then as we've talked about, eliminating laborers and adding more master motor equipment operators was an anticipated outcome from the sanitation modernization project. Public Works Sanitation would like to eliminate one laborer full-time position and add one MEO FTE. The fiscal impact of this is an increase of approximately $1,270.
And MEO is what, please?
It's a master motor equipment operator.
Thank you.
So this will allow more people to drive trucks. And this will continue to happen over time. It's a natural change at this point. Okay, I'm going to go on to the other changes now are all related to the AFSCME contract, and I will begin reviewing those. This amendment reflects the following changes in accordance with the recently agreed upon work agreement and the memorandum of understanding between the City of Bloomington and Local 2487. Some of the first changes are just title changes. As you probably may recall, over the last few months, years, I've tried to clean up our salary ordinances and use more gender neutral language. So working foreman, working foreman in Parks and Rec and utilities purchasing will now be a working for person. Kennel worker in the Public Works Animal Control Care and, I'm sorry, I thought I skipped something. So the kennel worker in the Public Works Animal Care and Control will now be an animal care technician, as the requirements that they have in those roles are much more technical than they used to be. And this grade also changed from a 103 to a 106. The fiscal impact of that is approximately $4,800. In the Public Works fleet, an apprentice master mechanic will now be an apprentice master technician, technician. In addition, the shop foreman will be changed to shop foreperson. There is no change to pay grades and no fiscal impact on these. It's just making more appropriate titles for these jobs. There are two title changes in utilities, transmission, and distribution. Alignment is now a line person, and the plant maintenance mechanic apprentice mechanic is now a lift station mechanic apprentice. Lift station mechanic. It's a mouthful. So those are the non-financial changes, and so the pay rate for labor, trades, and crafts in Section 2C has been replaced and reflects a 2019 increase of 2%. These salary increases over the next 4 years will cost additional $1,865 million, and the 2020% increase as dictated by the contract is 2.25%. In 2021, it's 2.5%. In 2022, it's 2.5%. So this salary ordinance is really just about the 2019 changes, and that's why I thought I would throw that in as additional information for you. Okay, next change is the on-call status pay noted in Section 2F of the salary ordinance increased from $35 to $40. And the fiscal impact is an increase of $8,834. The tool allowance reimbursement is increasing by $500, and this additional increase is going to cost approximately $4,000 in 2019. Section 2I has been revised with increased premiums to the following certifications, designations, and licenses. And the overall fiscal impact of all of these for 2019 is about $120,000. There's a lot of them. I'll go through them in detail, and I'm happy again to answer questions at the end. The wastewater plant operators will receive $1 per hour instead of 50 cents per hour for obtaining a Class 1 certification. And operators who receive a Class 2 certification will receive $1.50 per hour. The Class 3, they'll receive $2 per hour, and the Class 4, they'll receive $2.50 an hour. And this is an increase from additional 33 cents per hour for each certification received after a Class 1. Line persons will receive an additional $1 per hour instead of 50 cents per hour for obtaining and maintaining DSL certification. That's a certification that they had to work really hard to achieve. And we've been working really hard in transportation, T&D, getting our employees trained in that regard. The license premiums for lift station mechanics, plant maintenance mechanics, and apprentices in those roles increased from 33 cents an hour to $1 per hour. Overall, available license premiums for water plant operators increased from a maximum of $1.99 per hour to a maximum of $5 per hour. Operator and training water plant operators will receive additional $2 per hour instead of 50 cents. And after 1 year of service, this will increase to $3 per hour, which is up from 83 cents per hour. Those with a WT5 will receive $55 per hour, which is an increase of $1.16 per hour. And I would just like to add, water plant operators have been very hard for us to recruit, and it's a very critical role they serve. It's a lot of extra training and ability to pass really difficult tests. Our salary study that we did showed that we weren't paying at market, and these license changes help. These rates that we've changed on the licenses for these jobs in particular reflect the recommendation of the salary ordinance. Okay, and unlike prior years, line persons, master motor equipment operators, lift station mechanics, and laborers who are not required to hold a DSL or a Class II collection systems will receive an additional 50 cents per hour for each non-required certification. We're getting close to the end, I promise. It's a lot. CDL license premiums increased from 20 cents per hour for a Class B to 30 cents, and from 30 cents per hour from a Class A to 50 cents. Fleet maintenance certification premiums increased from 6 cents per hour for each certification to 20 cents for each certification. And miscellaneous certification pay increased from 10 cents per hour to 20 cents per hour. And 3 new certifications were added in this contract. In addition, the following certifications have been added to this list: a registered pesticide technician, a certified pesticide applicator, and a tree risk assessment certification. That's the summary of all the changes to certifications and licenses. And then, I think I got off. Did I get off here? No, I'm good. Okay, and then some other minor changes. Night and swing shift premiums increased in Section 2J. Evening or night shift shall receive 65 cents instead of 57 cents per hour, and swing shift employees shall receive 70 cents per hour instead of 63 cents per hour. This represents an increase of $2,712. And Section 2.0, or 2.0 rather, explains a $100 reimbursement for employees who are required to have CDLs, commercial driver's licenses, and we've been reimbursing for the physicals for commercial driver's licenses for our employees for the last couple of years, but we put it in the contract just to solidify it. And then finally, Section 2P has been added, which sets a contract ratification bonus of $250 to each AFSCME member on December 1st of 2019. The approximate fiscal impact of that is $40,000. And I forgot to mention when I first said thank you, the union president, Steve Robertson, who's with us here tonight, I believe, and Vicki Minder both wanted to express their appreciation for your accommodating this schedule. And I'm happy to take questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Are there questions from council on Ordinance 1901? Councilmember Chopra.
Yes, are all AFSCME employees then going to always be paid a living wage?
They all already do. They
all already do?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Councilmember Granger.
Thank you. Ms. Shaw, we had put aside or put into the 2019 budget $250,000 to, I think that was the amount, to deal with the differences in the salary study.
Mm-hmm.
So does this?
No, that's a different pot. I mean, that money
Okay.
is set for a different group of employees. That was for the non-union employees
Okay.
whose the salary studies showed that they needed market adjustments.
Sure.
And that's
Okay.
the year 2 money.
Thank you.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Tell us a little more about the contract ratification bonus. This is something that
I can.
seems very unusual to me.
I don't think apparently it's not that unusual with other contracts and other places. I think it's maybe new to us. Is that safe to say it's new to us? Okay, so the language on that says anyone who was an employee of ours, let me just double check, on December 1st, anyone who was an employee of ours at the time the contract was approved, on January 1 of this year, will receive an additional bonus on a $250 bonus on December 1st of 2019. And so if an employee leaves, so one of our employees was here on January 1st and then leaves employment or is promoted to a non-AFSCME position, they will not qualify. But anyone who is here as of January 1st and who is an AFSCME and an AFSCME position at this point and then is still in that position on December 1st will receive additional $250. It's a one-time bonus for the first year. I'm just repeating what President Steve Roberts said in the back.
One-time bonus for just the first year of the contract.
Yeah.
Okay, are you okay? Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
I said it's a one-time bonus, and it's only the first year of the contract.
And please introduce
The
yourself.
rest of the contract, pardon?
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please introduce yourself as well.
I'm Steve Robertson, and I'm president of Local 2487 ASME
Thank you.
for the city of Bloomington. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilmember Sims?
Fiscal impact of those.
Oh, it's over, I think it's around 120,000, excuse me, I think it's around 120,000 for 2019. And when I calculate the fiscal.
Just for the ratification bonuses? We're
Oh,
talking-
that's
what I'm talking-
$40,000. I'm sorry, I didn't hear your
Okay,
question.
no, that's what we were talking about.
That's around
yeah.
$40,000, assuming we have those same exact employees that we have currently as of January 1st on December 1st. And we likely won't. I mean, employees get promoted, they take on different roles, they move to other places to work. So I think that's the most it would be.
Okay, and how did that come about? I mean, we don't begrudge anything that they earn, but this is new. And
I believe that was a
I've worked with other
request.
unions, and I've just not really,
I believe that was, well, I know that was proposed to us by the AFSCME
Yes.
contract negotiation team. And I would say it was actually a compromise to an original proposal, which was kind of an annual bonus. May I say that?
We was close on getting the contract passed, and we just trying to put a little extra in to get it to passed. And our negotiating team asked me to present this to the management's negotiating team. And we negotiated on this because we brought to the table a higher amount than what this was. And we negotiated back and forth till we come up with agreement of the 250. Does that answer your question?
I guess I'm just wondering how it came about. I don't I don't disagree
Okay,
with it, but
our council
is that part of the
serves a lot
negotiation?
of contracts for a
Yes,
lot of
so-
cities.
Okay.
And this is stuff that they see at other cities that they negotiate contracts with. And that's how it comes out. That's how unions operate, is they negotiate contracts, and it's try to get wording in the contract. And this is a one-time deal we put in. It's only good for 1 year. It's all it's good for. Okay?
Did that set some sort of a precedent? So we're going to hear this for the next several years, maybe as part of the negotiation?
It'll be
And I know
4
that's-
years,
I know,
it'll be 4
I-
years
I-
before you hear it again. Okay?
But I will hear it again,
Maybe,
if I'm here.
if I'm here.
If I'm here. If I'm here, yeah.
If we're all here.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Further questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith is.
Yeah, I have a question about the night and swing shifts. It looks like the pay is more for a swing shift than for a night shift. And this is just an educational thing, because to me, I'd rather work a swing shift, because a night shift is, when your body wants to be sleeping. So is this typical? I mean,
That's the way to my knowledge, though, it's the way it's been for years. And so when we adjusted those rates, we just adjusted them accordingly. It's the same amount, I believe we adjusted each one. That's a good, yeah, we're all different though, right? We're all different. I'd rather do the same as you. I love to sleep at night. But I'm not sure why it's that way. It's a good question. I should go back and look historically when it was first or set up that way in former contracts.
Mr. Robertson, do you have anything to add as far as why the swing shift gets paid more than the night shift?
Because with swing shift, you could be working a night shift and then you can turn around and work a day shift. That's what a swing shift is. You fill in where it needs to be filled. Night shift, you're set to a night shift. But swing shift, you could be working night shift this day, and the next day you could be working a day shift. That's why it's called a swing shift.
Oh, I thought it was called a swing shift because you start in the afternoon and work until
No,
like 10 or 11.
the swing shift, it's a plant operator who has a swing shift, and that's what it boils down to. They fill in where they need to fill. If it's a day shift or a night shift, they swing back and forth from night to day.
Well, that would be hard.
Okay.
See, I knew I would learn something. Thank you.
Definitely the lack of consistency is hard, I would think. Thank you. I didn't realize President Robertson would be an associate of mine this evening. Thank you.
I'm glad he's here. Let's see, we're still on questions. Any other questions? I had one. The deliberation, or I should say the negotiations took a long time. And do you want to describe a little bit about the process?
So we tried something new this time. We're doing that with police as well. Instead of meeting, in fact, so my first set of contracts were the fire contracts in 2016. We met weekly for a couple hours at a time over the course of many, many weeks. And we heard that Bloomington Transit, at the same time we were doing the fire contract, did a retreat with their I think they were AFSCME too, aren't they? So they did a retreat, and within 3 days, they had a contract in place. So we thought, let's try that. And thankfully, AFSCME was willing to try that with us. So we had a 3-day retreat, and then I think we came back. We didn't finish. So as you can see, this is a complicated contract. This is our hardest contract. So many details. And so we came back after a 3-day retreat, and I think we came back for 2 days. Does that sound right? Or 1 day. We came back for 1 or 2 days and had a meeting in, I believe, July. And I believe that went to vote. After that meeting, we then came up with a contract that went to vote, and to our surprise, it was voted down by the membership. So we hit the drawing board again back in November, I believe, or early December, and AFSCME and Steve, under his leadership, they set it up so they could have another quick contract vote right after that. So it may have felt like a long time, but I think it was probably more efficient because of the retreat style, and because we were all focused. We didn't bring our other work with us. We just focused on getting a contract in place.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Robinson, do you want to add anything else, or is that kind of sum it up? It sounds like it was very complex. There were a lot of moving parts. You had to have.
It was a new experience for both of us on the 3-day retreat. It was something new. We tried it, and I think it was beneficial. We spent 3 hard days coming up with what we could, and I think it worked out real great. And I appreciate the mayor's negotiating team for working across the table with us. They did a wonderful job with us.
Good. That's good to hear. Thank you. Great. If there are no other questions, we'll move to the public. If the public has any comment on Ordinance 1901, please step to the mic. Seeing no public, we'll back to council for comment. Yes, Councilmember Sandberg will start.
Thank you. Well, as we are experiencing a government shutdown and the really serious consequences that are going to result from that, I think this is a time to be grateful here in the city of Bloomington for the individuals that provide our basic services. I take that responsibility very seriously. We have a lot of demands for our time and our attention and our resources, but the individuals who are working in Public Works, who are working in these departments, who are the AFSCME membership, are the ones that we owe a debt of gratitude for keeping the wheels on the bus turning. When you don't have your trash picked up and the garbage is accruing, you just don't know how bad things can get. And so when we have snowy conditions, we've not experienced much of that this winter, but we will. I think this weekend we might be tested a little bit. But a thank you to you, sir, for your leadership as president of AFSCME, and for all the individuals that are working with you for the city of Bloomington. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Sandberg. I'll go to Councilmember Sturbaum.
Yeah, it's just nice to hear good faith negotiating. Difficult, but good faith. And I think that we can do it. It shows other people can do it. And there can be good government. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comment? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I wanted to note that these salary increases and increases for certifications and such that are reflected in this contract were not in the budget that we passed for 2019. And it's a substantial amount of money. So, of course, I emailed our controller, Jeff Underwood, and said, well, how are we going to pay for this? And he assured me that for various reasons, he was not worried about that. Partially, it's because they're paid from different funds. A lot of the employees are from City of Bloomington Utilities, and so they have the wastewater and the water utilities that have different funds. So it's not like the whole burden will fall into the general fund of the city. Also, last year we had $3.9 million in reversions from 2017. That was money that was not spent, that was budgeted. And so the controller is optimistic that we will have enough reversions from 2019 to cover these extra expenses that are reflected in this contract. So we'll probably, it'll take a few months to shake out and to see how much more we need to appropriate, but I feel better after having communicated with Mr. Underwood about it, and that we will have funds available to make good on this promise, this contract.
Thank you for your comment. Other comments? Seeing no other comments, I'd just like to say congratulations. It's a long process, but it looks great. So it's a recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I move that council adopt ordinance 1901 this evening. This motion requires a second, is debatable and amendable, and requires a 2/3 majority to pass.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions, concerns? Okay, then we will go to a roll call vote on ordinance 1901, and then we need a 2/3 majority. Clerk Bolden.
Yes.
Yes.
Granger,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Volin,
Yes?
Sims. Yes. Sturbaum. Yes. Sandberg. Yes. Ruff.
Yes.
Thank you. Ordinance 1901 is adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we will now go to additional public comment. We've reserved 20 minutes. If anyone who hasn't spoken tonight would like to step to the microphone and have your say, please step forward. You'll have a chance on items in our next meeting at the time of those, we hear them. Okay, we'll go now to council schedule.
No items to bring to your attention. I don't know if you'll have some you want to raise with the rest of the council.
Anyone have any issues? Yes.
Just to verify, our next meetings for January, we have a regular session next week, followed by committee of the whole on the 23rd,
Yes.
and then a regular session on the 30th or on February.
The first Wednesday in February.
Okay, so the last Wednesday in January is no meeting.
Is currently scheduled. However, we have received the comprehensive, the transportation plan as an amendment to the comprehensive plan. And in accord
So we're looking at
with,
doing that on that date.
council leadership, we intend to introduce that at the regular session next week, where it would be subject to a motion either to referral to Land Use Committee or some other mechanism.
I just wanted to know that, so we're going to use that spare date to start thinking about it.
You'll be able to do that. The decision
Okay.
will be made next Wednesday, the 16th.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about our schedule? Okay, seeing none, we'll need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned, and we'll reconvene in a moment for Committee of the Whole.
And since we have already dispatched with ordinance 1901, we will begin this evening with the discussion on ordinance 1903 to amend Title 8 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Historic Preservation and Protection to establish a historic district regarding the Maple Heights Conservation District. And with us to present this evening is Connor Hendrick. Welcome, sir, and thank you.
Good evening, council members. Connor Herderich. I'm the Historic Preservation Program Manager with HAND. I'm here to give a presentation on Ordinance 1903 to amend Title 8 to establish the Maple Heights Conservation District. So what you see up here right now is actually a Sanborn map, the earliest Sanborn map we have, 1907, showing the southern portion of Maple Heights. It's just up north of the railroad tracks there. You can see that in 1907 there was some buildings there in the neighborhood. The yellow coloring indicates wood. So those are wooden structures there in 1907. This is the Maple Heights boundary map. So the boundary, the district is roughly bounded on the north by properties on West 15th, except for 3 properties that extend half a block north of West 16th along the east side of North Jackson Street. On the east by a few properties on the east side of North Madison Street. On the southeast by the Indiana Railroad tracks from Madison to Maple Street, and on the west by the backyard property lines of parcels on the west side of North Maple Street, starting in the 700 block and ending in the 900 block. The City of Bloomington uses historic surveys that identify properties that may be worthy of historic designation. The survey rates properties as being non-contributing, contributing, notable, or outstanding. Within the Maple Heights Conservation District, the ratings of non-contributing, contributing, and notable are given to the properties. There are no properties rated as outstanding. So we have a total of 39 non-contributing, 79 contributing, and 1 notable. Where do these ratings come from? They come from 2 historic surveys. There was a local survey done of Maple Heights in 2008, and it also comes from the survey completed by Bloomington Restoration, Inc. in 2018. So what I did was I used the most current data available to assign each property a rating. The reason being that the 2018 BRI survey essentially left out 66 properties, did not survey them in the boundary. So rather than calling them non-historic, which they weren't, or non-contributing, I used data I had from a 2008 survey of the neighborhood. And so I filled in the gaps there with the 2008 survey and used those ratings. After careful consideration of the application and review of the historic district criteria as found in Ordinance 95-20 of the Municipal Code, staff finds that the proposed district not only meets but exceeds the minimum criteria listed in the code. According to the ordinance, the proposed district only needs to meet 1 of the 10 criteria listed in the ordinance to qualify for historic designation. Staff finds that the district meets 4 of the listed criteria. So first I want to talk about the 2 historic criteria. Criteria 1A reads that it has significant character, interest, or value as part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the city, state, or nation, or is associated with a person who played a significant role in local, state, or national history. And so what we have up here is a Bloomington pioneer family, the Blairs. The Blairs were of a religious group called the Reformed Presbyterians, also known as Covenanters. They came from South Carolina. They were staunch abolitionists, so they took a moral stance against slavery. South Carolina at that time period allowed slavery, so I believe the Covenanters moved to Indiana to live in an environment that did not allow slavery, because Indiana was created in 1816, outlawed it. So that's one of the largest reasons why the Covenanters settled in Indiana and Bloomington in particular. So James Blair was one of the 2 ruling elders of the church. He was an Indiana University trustee. I want to speak a little bit to the character of the Blair family and these type of people. And to do that, I have a primary source here written in 1887 by Reverend T.A. Wiley. Wiley was one of the first pastors of the Covenanter congregation in Bloomington. And he's writing about when he first arrived in Bloomington in 1837. So this is a really great look at what it was like. He says, quote, "The self-reliance and perfect independence of the farmers struck me forcibly. By way of illustration, I would refer to Mr. James Blair's establishment, whose house and family I was perhaps better acquainted with than any other. Mr. Blair and his sons, then in the vigor of life, were not only excellent farmers, but they were their own carpenters, coopers, turners, harness makers, shoemakers, I believe also rope makers. And Mrs. Blair and her daughters were the spinners and the weavers and the dyers and the dressmakers, as well as housemaids, dairymaids, and cooks. In addition to all this, the family did not depend on the outside world for subsistence. They raised their own corn and wheat and oats and potatoes, and often their own sugar, sometimes their own sassafras tea, as well as their own beef, mutton, and pork. As far as their material things are concerned, could there be any person or class of persons more independent?" So they're obviously a very independent group of people, hardy people. They lived in a log cabin. Shortly after Mr. James Blair died. His son John built the house you see there in the picture. It's an I house. That is currently 823 North Maple, so that's still in the neighborhood and it's still standing. That was built circa 1960. Another interesting facet of history that connected the Blairs to a larger piece of U.S. history is their involvement in the Underground Railroad. There was a professor here, Dr. Henry Lester Smith. He wrote an article in 1917 about the Underground Railroad in Bloomington, and he actually interviewed some witnesses who were around in the 1860s, really the height of the Underground Railroad. And if council's not familiar with what that is, it was a system of a network of routes and safe houses that helped slaves go north to freedom, to Canada or other places. So several witnesses say that the Blairs were active in this, and perhaps that house was used as a safe house for slaves on their way north. So I think that's very interesting too. Talk about criteria 1C next. This means it exemplifies the cultural, political, economic, social, or historic heritage of the community. So the neighborhood of Maple Heights, it was first platted in the 1890s when portions of the Blair Tract were subdivided and sold as individual lots. So the event that really spurred this was the creation of the Dodd Chair Furniture Factory, which you see there on the slide. So as the need for worker housing increased, formerly agricultural land was transformed into neighborhoods. The Dodd factory later became the North End Furniture Factory, operated by the Showers family. And you can see there, it says Office and Factory Maple Heights. The development of the neighborhood is directly tied to the expansion of Bloomington's downtown. It's a local representation of early 20th century residential working class development spreading into rural areas in response to the industrial growth and decentralization of cities. Other examples you can see in Bloomington of this, you guys are probably familiar with, are McDowell, Prospect Hill, and Near West Side. And when I show you the architectural slides of this neighborhood, you might be familiar. You might be able to link that to the aforementioned neighborhoods. So let's talk about the architectural criteria. I believe it qualifies under criteria E and F. So E reads, contains any architectural style, detail, or other element in danger of being lost. Maple Heights neighborhood has lost many houses over the course of the past century, and many others have been so altered that they are unrecognizable to their original form, scale, or style. As the city of Bloomington continues to grow, the neighborhood will face increased pressure from parties seeking to buy reasonably priced lots and homes to turn into multifamily housing or other commercial enterprises. This single-family neighborhood represents an integral part of the Bloomington story and is a familiar visual feature of the city. Something that I noticed when I was going through the surveys, I looked at the 2001 survey, 2015, 2018, and what I saw happening was a trend, and as the years went on, the amount of notable structures in the area went down and the amount of non-contributing went up. And what that tells me is there's been some loss there, whether it's demolition or significant alteration in the neighborhood. All right, criteria 2F. Owing to its unique location or physical characteristics, represents an established and familiar visual feature of a neighborhood or a city. The form and style materials you're going to see in the houses of Maple Heights are really representative of the need for worker housing near the downtown area, as I said before. The earliest 20th century saw rapid growth of industry in Bloomington, which led to the increased need for small, affordable housing located near the factories and rail yards. Maple Heights became an ideal location for families to live affordably while still remaining close to most of the major factories. So some of the things you're going to be seeing in these houses, you're going to notice they're going to have smaller footprints. They're not very large. Some of the floor plans are a vernacular style, so these aren't floor plans that are created by architects who are trained at universities. These are floor plans that are created and passed down over generation, a very folk building style. You're also going to notice there's not going to be a lot of brick and limestone here. It's wood, okay, because that's what was affordable. No high-style architecture or ornamentation, and just looking at it really speaks to who it was built for and who lived there originally, and you can see that. So if you notice at the top here is the Blair House. So this is the I house I showed you earlier in the black and white photograph. It's 823 North Maple. It is notable. It has been significantly altered. That brick porch was put on there, some stairs going on the left-hand side, and some additions in the rear, I believe, but the core of the house remains. Below it, I believe, is the property adjacent to it. As another Blair family house, I believe constructed around 1900. That's your California bungalow. These are two houses that really are almost identical. They're pyramid cottages, and they're both have been believed to have been constructed by James Blair. But just, again, notice the simple shape, wood, made out of wood. These are not very high-style houses, but they're beautiful, and they're from a certain time period, certainly. The one on the top is a folk Victorian. It's another one of your kind of working man's house made from wood. Below that is a saddlebag. And so a saddlebag is that vernacular form. You see the chimney in the middle. There's actually two entrances to that. There's two doors in the front, 2 rooms, and the chimney splits it. And we call that a saddlebag. And you can find that easily, like look at in a log cabin form. But this one obviously is a little more modern looking. The one on top there is your hall and parlor. It's another vernacular building style. You can trace that back to the East Coast, then even earlier on in England. And then we have another pyramid roof cottage there. You can see these homes for the most part are in pretty good shape, the ones I decided to show you, but remember you're seeing about 10 out of like 116 properties here. We have a T-plan cottage up there. And then below we have your bungalow. You're going to see a lot of bungalows in this neighborhood. So I just want to reiterate that the architectural form and style of these homes are really indicative of the needs of working class residents, because that's the neighborhood. That's who lived there originally. This is an ordinance for Maple Heights to establish a conservation district. This is different, obviously, than a historic district, and I was going to go over some of the differences there. In a conservation district, essentially the only thing different between how it is now and how it will be if it becomes a conservation district is that certificate of appropriatenesses are needed for new construction of principal and ancillary buildings viewable from the public right-of-way, demolitions, and moving structures. So there's no design review on exterior alterations or additions, right, as in a conservation district. The design guidelines will aid design review, and those guidelines will be created by a committee made up of neighborhood residents, myself, and 1 or 2 commissioners from the HPC. And this is to guide new construction. And really, they're just looking at things like setback and height and orientation, fenestration patterns that you see in the neighborhood, very basic things. It's not meant to be very specific. So after 3 years, property owners in the conservation district will be mailed a ballot to vote on whether they want to remain a conservation district or be elevated to a historic district. Each property owner receives only 1 ballot. 51% of the ballots must be cast in favor to remain a conservation district, or the district will automatically elevate to historic district status. So to wrap things up, this is a single-family neighborhood. It represents an integral part of the Bloomington story and is a familiar visual feature of the city. A local conservation district designation will ensure that these houses are not dramatically altered or lost in the future, and that the neighborhood will remain in its historic setting as a single-family residential area, thus securing the preservation of this architecture and its story for another century. Staff and the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission would recommend that the council establish the proposed Maple Heights Conservation District. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hurrick. Are there any questions from council? Councilmember Ruff.
So first of all, has there ever been, you mentioned McDowell, you mentioned Prospect Hill, near West Side, which I understand is in a process right now. But has there ever been a conservation district that wasn't elevated, in Bloomington, that was not elevated to a historic district?
No.
So you mentioned what happens when a to applications for alterations of buildings in a conservation district. What happens, how do those change when it becomes elevated, assuming it becomes elevated to a historic district?
So if it becomes elevated to a historic district, then a lot more will come under purview of the Historic Preservation Commission. Any kind of substantial alteration of the property, if you want to change the siding, if you want to put in different kinds of windows, you want to alter the roof pitch, all these new elements come into play. So it becomes a much more specific design review, intense design review process once it gets elevated. But as a conservation district, like you said, it only really covers 3 things.
And could you real quickly kind of go over again the process by which, after 3 years, the survey of the property owners is done?
So HAND will determine who the property owners are in the district. Doesn't matter if they live in Bloomington or Texas. They will be mailed 1 ballot. So if you own 5 properties, you get 1 ballot. Each property owner gets 1 ballot, and they will be asked, would they like to elevate to a historic district or remain a conservation district? And unless 51% return the ballot saying they wish to remain a conservation district, it will be elevated to a historic district.
Okay, so it's 51% of the individuals that were mailed ballots.
Correct.
Not 51% of the actual properties owned by people.
That one detail right there, Councilmember Ruff, I am not 100% sure on. I've rolled it over a few times. I would love to have legal here to really get to the bottom of that. But that's one distinction I don't know of.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Rallo. Did you have something to add?
First of all, it was an excellent presentation. I really learned a lot. My question is about conservation districts or historic districts in general. Do they need to be contiguous in terms of the geographic outline? In other words, can they be represented with islands of homes outside the district, or is it necessary to have them in a contiguous area?
They absolutely do not have to be contiguous. I contacted the lady who is in my position for Indianapolis Historic Preservation, and she said, I believe 7 of 11 of their districts are not contiguous, so that's not something that's standard.
And so when you do a review, or the commission does a review, they're looking outside of the neighborhood a bit in terms of some orphan structures or something that might not be connected. Is that true?
Sure, yeah. They might look at, they definitely look at the survey ratings, and so
Okay.
if there might be some higher survey ratings over there,
Yeah.
they might connect that in.
Okay, and then just to follow up, we discussed this a bit during our Friday session, and that was that the northeastern part of the conservation district proposal is very, it's not, doesn't have continuity, I suppose, or it has areas out. And this is could you just tell me, is this because it's not in the same period, it's not the same style of homes and so forth? Age difference?
To be honest, I've been here for several months, and when this map was put together and when it was decided what the boundaries would be, I did not have a say in the construction of the boundaries, and I was never given a reason why they're drawn as they are. Besides being in the Maple Heights neighborhood in the core area, obviously, but the northeastern section that you're speaking of, I believe maybe some representatives of the neighborhood today could speak to that in a public comment.
Yeah, or maybe by next time we could.
Sure, next time, yeah.
Have some, yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Any additional questions from council? And seeing none, we go to the public to see if there's anyone here who would like to take the podium and sign in and make a comment. Feel free to queue up.
Can we get a show of hands how many people are interested in speaking to this issue? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we can do 5 minutes per person.
Go ahead and start lining up, please. And again, feel free to take your 5 minutes or less.
If we could please keep it going. And sign in after you speak, please.
Hi, I live over on 12th Street.
Your name is?
Mia Beach.
Thank
and
you.
I own a property.
And I am sorry, if you can pull the microphone down, everybody, it is on a bendable stand,
Okay.
but we need to have your mouth right on it.
All right, is this better? So I own a property over on 12th Street, and my mother-in-law owns a property adjacent. And we have thought about it a lot and are definitely in favor of that. It's an old home. It's from the late 1800s. So I just wanted to, I have to like leave pretty much right now, but, you know, in favor of the Conservation District. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Just move it off to the side there so the next person can speak, please.
My name is Terry Usry. I own 2 parcels on 13th Street. I used to own another parcel on Rogers. I am definitely in favor of the proposal for the Conservation District. I really like the character of the neighborhood the way it is. It's a very nice mix of affordable housing, working class people, students, faculty, and so on. I just really fear that without this kind of protection, the neighborhood will change in ways that will lose the historical nature and the character of the neighborhood, and it will become gentrified and be a bunch of McMansions, which I don't want in my neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, if we want to start that sign-up sheet just back with everybody else that's in line to speak, that'll save us a little time. Once you sign in, make sure everybody behind you gets a chance.
My name is Susan Hathaway. I've lived in Maple Heights for about 17 years now. And like Terry, I love the neighborhood. It's such a great place to live. It has a wonderful character that you don't find in a lot of neighborhoods. I've lived in Bloomington long enough to have seen the effects of development, both good development and bad development. And I know that our neighborhood is very vulnerable to development at this point. You know, when I think about what would have happened to, say, Prospect Hill, if those houses hadn't been preserved, if that neighborhood had been decimated by development. You know, when I think of what happened in the 60s and 70s when really nice houses were torn down, and then those neighborhoods, those areas kind of went downhill for a long time. You know, I don't want to see that happen to our neighborhood, and I'm afraid that it will because of where we're located and because a lot of the neighborhoods around us are going to be protected. So I'm speaking in favor of the Conservation District. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Lucy Shake, and I own the property at 708 West 12th Street, corner of 12th and Fairview. Have since 2005, so I've seen a little bit of evolution of the neighborhood through those years. And I'm also speaking in favor of the Conservation District. I can speak to the boundaries that were drawn that Connor mentioned. We did have a couple of discussions and those 3 public meetings about the boundaries and how those settled out for our neighbors. And we decided on the ones that you see here because they really protect that Blair district, the core piece of Maple Heights, without stretching out onto the Madison-Rogers corridor. There are a couple of houses you can see that cross over. Actually, do they? No, they don't. We're staying on this side of the corridor. We tried to keep it really pure on that Blair side of the street because of like what Sue said and everybody else, that it's a very tight neighborhood. And that's part of what I would like to see protected with the Conservation District is that historic neighborhood form, and that has to do with the massing and the placement on the lot. I have enjoyed living in the neighborhood because of the small houses, and during my time there, I've seen some infill come in, including one of the largest houses in Bloomington, probably, on the old Sims Poultry Factory lot there. It is now a double lot owned by one person, and it has a barricade of arborvitae and steel gate and fence, which is very out of character with what I know about Maple Heights, and where we actually really don't have that many fences. So I am speaking in favor of the Conservation District. I also want to say that I used to live in Prospect Hill, another conservation district in Bloomington. I was part of that formation and also part of the District Guidelines Committee, so I was in some of those hearings when people came with proposals for new buildings. And it's a process that works. It's a process that is a process, but it makes for better neighbors, better neighborhoods, better properties that are going to be historic someday themselves. They really, what I've seen happen in Prospect Hill has been really positive for the neighborhood. So I am pro-conservation district. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jane Goodman. I live in Maple Heights. I have since 2003. I live at 715 West 13th Street. It's one of the 4 known Blair family houses. Connor showed you 2 houses on West 13th Street. They were built at the same time, about 1912, for 2 of the Blair family daughters. We actually still share. I wonder if it's the only still standing outhouse in Bloomington. We don't use it for that. We changed it into garden sheds, but it falls right on the property line, literally exactly on it, with one, it's a 2-seater, one for each sister. So, yeah. So that, speaks to some of the architectural interest of the neighborhood. I feel personally very nourished by the neighborhood and by living in a historic house. But aside from that, I feel like the future of Bloomington, we can all see how quickly the city is changing, and it's going to change. That's just life. Life changes, and since I've lived in Bloomington the last 20 years, the downtown has massively changed, and I'm good with that. I'm from Boston. I have buildings. I like that kind of thriving downtown, but at the same time, I really like the historic character of the core neighborhoods. And I feel like that would be a tremendous loss to Bloomington to lose that architecture and that history. Our neighborhood is probably the closest to the Trades District. It's literally right there. I think that the properties in our neighborhood would be very attractive to developers for demolition and rebuilding. And that's partly why that we've come forward now. We can really feel that sense of encroachment of the downtown right around us. I appreciate the Blair family history of the neighborhood, of course, living in one of the Blair houses. But also, I think it's a part of our history that we don't want to lose, and we don't want to lose the historic footprint of it either. So for these and many other reasons, I support the neighborhood becoming a conservation district. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Additional comments?
Hi, my name is Daniel Bingham. I don't live in Maple Heights. I live in the Waterman neighborhood, which is similar of character. I know many people who live in Maple Heights, and I've seen the housing, and it's very similar to the housing in Waterman. I'm not in favor of conservation or historic districts because they restrict our ability to move in the face of climate change and what's coming at us. They are often promoted as promoting affordability. I did a quick survey of the data while I was sitting there tonight. There was a recent study that came out in New York City that showed no correlation between affordability and historic districts, but that was in Manhattan, where it's already about as dense as it can possibly be. Other studies in cities where it is not already Manhattan dense have found negative correlations between historic districts and affordability because they freeze the housing stock in that neighborhood effectively, and it cannot grow with the population as it grows. Maple Heights is absolutely, ground zero for potential gentrification because of the Trades District right there. But if you freeze the ability to add infill housing, freeze the ability to take some of these single-family homes and make them duplexes or quadplexes, then the affordability is going to drop out the bottom in that neighborhood because people who want to work and live close to the Trades District are going to buy up the properties and they're going to sit in them. and they're going to be able to afford to renovate them within the bounds of the historic district code, and they're going to get more expensive that way. McDowell Gardens, one of my close friends is a software engineer who works from home and makes upwards of $100,000 and lives in McDowell Gardens and bought his house for over $300,000. That's Elm Heights prices. I totally get the desire to preserve the neighborhoods, the character of it. That neighborhood has great character. I go and have dinner at the Overlook on a frequent basis, and there's a wonderful community in that neighborhood that absolutely should be preserved. But historic districts are a blunt instrument that have negative consequences and will tie our hands. If you look at, even in the presentation we saw tonight, on the example of rebuilds that remove historic character, if you looked at the house in the after picture, it had solar panels on the roofs. Think about, historic districts restrict changing windows. One of the main things you can do to a house to make it more efficient is put more efficient windows in. Most houses have 4 inches of insulation. We really need that to be closer to 6 or 8. Changing roof lines. Most of those roof lines are not passive solar, right? A passive solar roof line slopes up to the south direction so that you can collect as much southerly light as possible. That's not what those roof lines do. We need to be changing some of those roof lines. This neighborhood is close to downtown. We are gonna get increased population. We are, if you think about what's happening on the West Coast already, the wildfires, the smoke all summer, and into November, people are gonna move. They're running out of water out there. The aquifer is emptying. Nevada's gonna run out of water. People are gonna move east. If you think about what's happening on the southern coast, they're getting hammered by these 500-year hurricanes, 1,000-year hurricanes. How many Hurricane Harveys that flood out your house can you live through before you decide, I can't live on the coast anymore? They're gonna move inland. We're sitting pretty, for the most part, from what it seems like the climate consequences will be. We're in a good spot, which means people will probably come to us. We could be looking at as much as 10 feet of sea level rise by 2050. That's about 30 years. That's enough to take out the southern half of Florida. That's millions of people migrating right there. And the seawall, you can't hold back 10 feet of sea level rise with seawalls. You can't hold that back. So we need to be prepared for that. And sustainable living, sustainable urban design is dense. It's walkable. We can definitely try to preserve some neighborhoods of single-family housing, but we need to be developing the urban core. We need to either be going up and downtown more than we are currently. That whole garage discussion ended up centering significantly on the height. We need to be going up further than we are. Or if we want to preserve that, then we need to densify these core neighborhoods close to downtown so that more people can live in them within walking distance of downtown.
30 seconds.
Historic districts tie our hands in doing that. So I think what we should do, rather than using this blunt instrument, is step back, figure out how to preserve the things that we can afford to preserve, because the harsh reality is we can't afford to preserve everything. We need to change. We need to change our infrastructure. We need to change the way we live. We need to change most of our society. But we can step back, figure out a different tool that allows us to preserve the things we want to preserve, including the affordability, the character of the neighborhood, but still respond to these changes.
Thank you. Additional comments? Seeing none, we are back to council for final comments. Councilmember Chopra.
Yeah, I'm going to be voting do pass, though the reason is that I do think that we have a lack of single-family homes in Bloomington, and that development is not going toward single-family homes. However, I do have doubts that the area will not be gentrified and will not price out middle-income folks in Bloomington. Surely, people who are going to work at the tech park are going to want to buy these houses, and within the bounds can improve them and make them a lot nicer, change windows, insulation, solar panels, all of that, and they could possibly be priced out. So I have doubts that this would stop that from happening, but I do respect the wishes of the homeowners, and I also respect the fact that we need to keep a good mix of housing in Bloomington. And I think that new development will not be primarily single-family. I think it should be more condos and building up. And so to keep a good mix, we need to preserve what we already have. I will be voting yes as a recommendation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rallo. Oh, he's not at his seat. Councilmember Sturbaum.
Well, tear down is not green. There's embodied energy in those buildings, and the vision of taking down small single-family residences to build dense rentals. What that does, it takes the person who's trying to own a home for themselves is now bidding against someone who can develop a home that's going to have 3, 4, 5. That's the vision that we're talking about in our current UDO. And that is a direction I don't think people want to see Bloomington go. Home ownership is something that young people want, middle-aged people want, older people want. There's no big change in, the polls say that while people are working and they're quite young and they're under 30, they're still satisfied with rental, but when they want to start raising a family, they want to settle in the community, they want to own homes. And some of the people who are talking about how we don't really want to own homes, they have nice, safe homes in the suburbs, and they're talking about what happens inside the city. And I lived before we had zoning. I've been in the city 55 years, so I've seen the vision of what happens when you don't have zoning. The houses get overoccupied. The owners don't live there. They don't maintain the neighborhood. And then the people who did live there are sort of driven out because the place is starting to deteriorate. So I've seen the future, and it was pre-zoning in Bloomington. So single-family zoning has saved these neighborhoods, and that is the history of the city. So I'm just explaining that I've watched in my neighborhood and in the greater Prospect Hill, even while the Conservation District came in, people wanted to buy, tear down, and they wanted to buy and tear down what were small, affordable houses and what are still small, affordable houses. And what stopped them was the local designation Conservation District. And, you know, some people call it gentrifying when people fix houses, but houses go through a life cycle. These are from 1890. They're from 1900. Houses don't stay together if you don't take care of them. And when people buy them and start renting them out and aren't really invested in them, they fall apart. And when people don't have the money to fix them, they fall apart. So the city has invested lots of money in helping get people to fix, helping people maintain these houses, but really once people start owning the houses, they can take care of them. So they kind of go through a cycle, and there's a point of real affordability in the decay cycle when you're not quite decayed enough, but it's still safe and livable. So you pass through this very affordable moment, and then it goes into unlivability, and this old cycle was tear them down at that point. And the turnaround happened when we started preserving them and fixing them and repairing them and ensuring that people who would invest in those neighborhoods weren't going to see this cycle of decay continue. So that's a brief explanation of how I see the cycle of housing and life cycles of these places. And, you know, what's coming, people can build little places for larger families, for grandma, for extension. That's still going to happen. And there is a condition for duplexes if it is a conditional use. So there is some of that still happening, even in single family in the new UDO. So clearly I support this, but I wanted to say one more thing about the vote. What's nice about the vote and what's fair about the vote is people get to get used to this situation in 3 years. And what it basically is majority rule at that point. You know, you go through a 3-year period of experiencing this, and people are very worried at the beginning of these processes because the home is it's your biggest investment, and it matters deeply to people who own homes. So of course, everyone is very concerned about people making rules about their houses. So that the comfort of that conservation district, it gives some time for everyone to kind of get used to it and see, and then they still have an opportunity to maintain it as a conservation district through the vote. So I'm supporting this, and that's about all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Rallo.
Well, I think Councilmember Sturbaum, that was very well said, and I think Mr. Bingham's comments were very well put as well. I think that there is a tension between increasing density and certainly with considerations of climate change or sprawl, if that's a concern, which it is. So Mr. Bingham brings up some good points versus that what we're talking about, conserving historic structures. And Councilmember Sturbaum brought up embodied energy, which is an important part of this, not tearing down old structures and putting up new ones. There's an energy cost, and there's a climate cost there. But I think Mr. Bingham said we can't preserve everything, and that's correct. But we can preserve some things, and we have to be judicious about what we preserve. And I think that we need to concentrate on mixes of density downtown. We have to think about mixes of income downtown and make sure that there's equity being reflected. And we have to use the tools we can to ensure that. So in the next week, I think I'll look at density maps and see how this particular neighborhood fits in terms of is it warranted for a conservation district. So I'll pass tonight, but I'm quite favorable to it. But I want to make sure that that consideration about density is a very good one to consider. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Granger.
Thank you. It was a great presentation, first of all. I like it when I learn something about a district. I like this district. I think it's worth preserving. I like the smaller homes. I like that it's affordable. And I think we do run a risk of losing quite a bit if we don't try to conserve it, if you will. So I am going to vote in support of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I'm also in support of this conservation district. I live in McDowell Gardens Conservation District, and at least Maple Heights, you know what the rules are, because in McDowell, which was the first conservation district in the city, there was a kind of a misinterpretation of the rules, and we were a conservation district for a long time, but then a new look at the Indiana state law revealed that this 3-year, if you want to stay a conservation district, you have to take action. And so overnight, we were a historic district. We didn't know that we had to take any action if we wanted to stay a conservation district. Nevertheless, we have solar panels on our house. We didn't have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission to have the solar panels put on our house. We did have to do that to put new siding on the house. But what I love about historic districts or conservation districts is it is walkable. It has real character. You go past houses that are built they're interesting. They're not all built at once. There's a history, there's an evolution. They're not all cookie cutter houses. although some of them are kit homes, which is what my home was, but it's 1925, so even the kit homes are interesting to people nowadays. So I think really preserving that history of Bloomington is important, and it's, this is kind of the missing piece of the west side, of the near west side of Bloomington, the northern part, which reflects our history and reflects the workers that made homes there, that worked in the Showers factory and other factories in downtown Bloomington. So I appreciate that the extra work was done to resurvey after it was found that the shard really ignored a lot of the houses. And it really is impressive. I mean, if you see all those purple houses there, that's a good percentage. So I think this is a good, cohesive conservation district. And, I always learn something from Mr. Bingham, and so I will reflect on what he said as well. But I think overall, I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
So interesting. I got so choked up, I had to leave for a second. So thank you all. Very nice presentation, Connor, too. I would jump on and say that as well. This is a tough situation for us. We want to, or I think there's value in preserving some core neighborhoods. There's some that we have to do because others are protected through other means. So I think in some cases we have to do that. But I think on the other side, we're severely limiting ourselves from a growth standpoint at some point. And so I will vote do pass for this because I believe that we need to preserve that. But I think this conversation is going to evolve eventually where we're going to have to accommodate growth. We're going to have to accommodate infill. We're going to have to accommodate density. We're just going to have to. Tonight is not that night, however, I do believe. But that's my precursor. I think one of my council members laid out this plan on what we'll be talking about the rest of the year on certain things. I just think that in the future, we will be talking about more density away from downtown. I'm okay with that, but I think we're just going to have to do that at some point. So, but I will vote to pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from council? Councilmember Volin.
I think Councilmember Sims says that we need to evolve eventually to accommodate growth. I think that's, we don't have that luxury. Mr. Bingham is right about that. In fact, I'd say Mr. Bingham is right about almost everything he said. We need to change now. I mean, we have to start thinking twice now. I'd like to think that we have gotten better in my time on council about giving away tax breaks as we did in my first term to developers because they asked for them rather than because they did something that was meritorious to the city fabric. But development also at that time and mostly to this day, the stuff that we see is multi-lot. Developers been aggregating lots and building some big block-long project on it. And we've talked previously in this chamber about how smaller lots are better, and we want to try to keep them disaggregated so that smaller buildings get built on them, more sustainable buildings. I don't know that a conservation district prevents redevelopment. It simply raises the bar. Like it makes it a higher standard for redevelopment. A building that it's demolished by neglect. Councilmember Sturbaum knows well this notion, and we've worked to prevent it from happening. There's occasionally, I think if a developer is sensitive to the standards of the neighborhood, they could get the neighborhood to permit a two-story building or a building with multiple units in it if it was small and it fits the character of the neighborhood. I've lived in a neighborhood that, I didn't want to live in anymore because there were no permanent neighbors. And I think that the permanence of owner occupants, the permanence of a community is something we also need to preserve. You know, as important as it is to densify the city, I don't want to do it at the expense of, I mean, if the result is less interaction between people. And, you know, God knows we've had our share of buildings that went the wrong way, that we had ugly towers that sprouted up 50 years ago that they're on campus, and towers that are not so tall, but perhaps not too much less ugly downtown. But I mean, I'm thinking about my neighborhood now, Elm Heights, and both there and in Old Northeast, there are 2- and 3-story apartment buildings built before zoning that are super crappy, and they have big parking lots on them. And I've talked about grayfield development in places like Eastland Plaza, but there's an opportunity for grayfield development in those neighborhoods. We could densify, we can give incentives to owners of those apartment buildings to build on those parking lots. Few homeowners have big old parking lots on their property. They may have a driveway, but they pale in comparison to the big parking lots that were carved out when those 2, 3-story buildings, ugly apartment buildings were built in the 60s and the 70s. So that's got me thinking that, you know, in the upcoming UDO, we can find a targeted incentive to start densifying neighborhoods in that way, which is not going to cause any single-family homeowner to object for a building that they're used to already being there. But we do have to think creatively about this. We do have to face the fact that the result of this is going to be that properties in those neighborhoods will get more expensive. McDowell, we cannot say that McDowell is not more expensive because of the conservation designation. It means there's a guarantee that there's not going to be that much more housing built there, and so the housing is going to go up. This is the same problem we have citywide, where we're not building enough housing and the prices are going up, and then we're wondering why. That's why. So, I mean, I do support this, but I also recognize the irony that Mr. Bingham has pointed out, and I'm going to be looking for ways to make up for it. But I do also believe that there's hope that we can densify even neighborhoods that get this designation, as long as it's done sensitively. And we need to find ways to target the particular kind of densification that the neighborhood would accept. So with that, I'm going to support. I'm going to make a recommendation do pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from council? Councilmember Ruff.
Yeah, there's a lot to sort of wrap our heads around. The input from the public was really valuable tonight, and comments by council members. Clearly, there's some things I need to sort through and think about. But one thing I want to say about my own thinking, I'm not sort of going to conflate or draw too many similarities between the action this council took regarding subsidizing new parking structures downtown in the face of dramatic climate change in the near future, with the argument that we need to retain maximum flexibility to densify neighborhoods because of a probable mass migration of people to Bloomington. I mean, so slowing climate change by adopting policies that are intended to reduce emissions, like we had in mind when trying to get away from subsidizing and encouraging vehicle use by providing more and more parking, compared to anticipating and adapting to social, political impacts of climate change as a result of climate change, causing people to move here, to me are very different. They're two very different concepts. They're different things to think about. Climate change will happen if we don't dramatically change our way of living. But large-scale migration to Bloomington as a result of impacts of climate change isn't, to me, as clear an inevitability. It's a different sort of thing. Physical growth in the community, of the community, expansion of the community in terms of population and a built environment, is something that this comp plan clearly states is not an actual goal that we seek for Bloomington. It's very clearly stated in the comp plan. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a very clearly stated goal in the comp plan.
So while I do need to think about the arguments that have been made tonight about the connections between this sort of policy and our global stewardship of our environment in the face of catastrophic climate change, I mean, I need to think about these things a little bit more and weigh in the arguments like Councilmember Sturbaum, for example, has made and others have made about the embodied energy and in existing structures, et cetera. There's a lot of elements here to think about. So I'm going to pass tonight, but not because I'm not pretty favorable to this, but there are some things I need to sort through and think about. So thank you.
Thank you, and everyone has spoken except me. I do want to make the very important connection between history, which it was very instructional to hear about these homes, how they were built, who were building them, the visions that they had. They moved from another state. They were abolitionists. I mean, this is rich. This is rich history that tells us about the founders of this community and how this community got its foothold. And that, of course, is history. And a lot of people find history boring and dry. I think it's fascinating and it's worth preserving. It's worth knowing about. It's worth thinking about. But let's jump from history to the here and now. I'm always focused on the here and now. And the humanity of neighbors wanting to live in a neighborhood of their own choosing, and of neighbors who want to live in places that already have small footprints, that are already naturally affordable, that are already cohesive, and they want it to remain that way rather than to be changed in a way that could significantly impact their ability to be friendly, neighborly, have the kind of house that they want that is low maintenance. Now, with respect to moving from conservation to historic, I think there's also a lot of myths about what that means, what you can and cannot do to your own property. And my experience in working with districts that went from conservation to historic is there's still a lot of flexibility. The neighbors can decide what elements of changes can be made to the structures that already exist. You can indeed make them more efficient in terms of windows and solar panels. And so there is not this huge restriction that I think many like to equate with, oh, it's elite, or it's, this is gentrification. This is actually making the kind of home improvements that actually do reduce the carbon footprint. Once you have a small home, it's owner occupied, it's yours, and you have that investment in the property to keep it maintained and to keep it as energy efficient as possible. I am not in favor of being so heavy-handed that we dictate to people how they want to live and what kind of homes they want. We need owner-occupied housing. We need single-family housing. We need the full array of housing that fits the needs of everybody who wants to live and work in this community. We know we have a housing shortage, but we're not going to get to where we want to go by destroying the homes that already exist that are small, efficient, and that the homeowners want to maintain in a fashion that does not blow it completely out of its livability factor. That's humanity. That's the history of the here and now that we want to pass on. As someone who has seen a lot of transformations from conservation to historic, I see more of the upside than the downside. I'm in full support, and thank all the neighbors who came tonight who will have another set of challenges as this possibly moves forward. Thank you. Now, let us, if no one else has any further comments.
Move to pass.
Second.
Move to pass. All right, let me start on my left with Councilmember Rallo.
Excuse me, pass.
Pass, yes.
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 Pass.
702.
702. Thank you. All right, thank you very much, and we do appreciate the hard work that you have presented for us this evening. Now we move on to ordinance 1904, and this is to amend Title 8 of the Bloomington Municipal Code, historic preservation to establish a historic district, and this is with respect to a property on South Smith Road. And we have petitioners here this evening. Are you going to be helping to present again, Mr. Herbert? You need a minute to get set up?
Sorry about that, there's a little confusion. I will do a presentation, but there will not be a PowerPoint, unfortunately. Because the property that I'm going to be introducing is a wonderful, wonderful property. So I'm going to do a quick presentation on Ordinance 1904. It's known as the Harvey Nelson House. We do have the petitioners, Jim and Sally Harvey, with us this evening. Thank you all for coming. So this is located at 1175 South Smith Road. The Harvey Nelson House designation consists of 3 structures on a 3.46 acre parcel. Staff and the Historic Preservation Commission believes the nomination meets 3 of the criteria listed in Ordinance 95-20 and is eligible for designation as a single property historic district. So criteria 1A has significant character, interest, or value as part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the city, state, or nation, or is associated with a person who played a significant role in local, state, or national history. So this property was originally an 80-acre tract deeded from the state of Indiana to Robert Ewing in 1830. That tract remained intact until 1936. The Depression was going on, and the Ewings were forced to sell, break up the 80-acre tract. At that time, a 20-acre parcel, which included a 2-story I-house, a 1-bedroom house, and a barn, was sold to Alice and Ralph Nelson. So the Nelsons were active members in the Bloomington community. Alice worked at Indiana University. She was a director of the Halls of Residence for 25 years under the tenure of IU President Herman B. Wells. During that time period, she was instrumental in bringing libraries into dorms. So that was something that a lot of universities on the East Coast had already had established practices of having libraries available to dorms. She helped bring that to IU, and she oversaw a very large dormitory building program in the 1950s. So I believe her portrait is hanging somewhere in the Student Union. Ralph was a civic leader, active in community development, expansion, and served as the president of the First National Bank. So it's associated with the Nelsons there. Criteria 2G exemplifies the built environment in an era of history characterized by a distinct architectural style. Really, guys, council members, this is about preserving a piece of early agricultural landscape of Bloomington. This was a small family farm. If you transport yourselves back to the mid-19th century, there wasn't a whole lot outside of downtown Bloomington. It was farmland, and so this was one of those farms that dotted the landscape. A once common site that has now obviously become very scarce in Bloomington. So it's about preserving that kind of agricultural landscape, at least a piece of it in the city. Something I could compare it to is the Hinkle Garten farmstead that's in the city limits. It's currently serving as a BRI headquarters. Criteria 2E contains any architectural style, detail, or element in danger of being lost. So the Harvey Nelson House and the Prairie Style Barn are the only buildings of their type in the vicinity. The Harvey Nelson House is an I-house. It is very similar looking to the Blair House that I showed you in the Maple Heights presentation. Except it's much more historically preserved than the Blair House is. It's a travesty I don't have the PowerPoint. There was a similar prairie-style barn on the Belcher farm to the east, which was torn down during the construction of the Gentry Estates subdivision, and another similar barn and Queen Anne house on the Smith farm to the north, which were torn down during the construction of the Gentry Honors subdivision. The main house is currently well-maintained and so is the one-room house and barn. They are all basically unaltered, so they all go together and all are contributing to this one historic designation. The owners of the property, James and Sally Harvey, have cared for this property lovingly since they purchased it in the 70s. They are the ones who came forward and are seeking historic designation of their property. Letters notifying adjacent property owners were sent out, and staff did not receive any negative feedback and did in fact receive a letter of support from a neighbor. So staff and the Historic Preservation Commission would ask that the council approve ordinance 1904.
All right, thank you. Would the petitioners like to make a comment or before we go to council for questions, or Mr. Harvey? And now we have some pictures while you're speaking of your beautiful home.
We purchased this house 40 years ago.
Can you put both pictures up while he's speaking? Can you cram them
And
both in?
Mr. Harvey, if you could just officially state your name for
I'm
the
sorry.
record.
I'm
Thank
Jim
you.
Harvey. This is my wife, Sally. As I said, we bought this property 40 years ago. When we bought it on Smith Road, there were 3 houses on Smith Road at the time. One of those on the farm north of us, and the barn disappeared when it was developed as a subdivision. That's our primary concern. Having lived here 40 years, and you can look at our age, we're concerned about what will happen to this property when we're gone. And we've been approached by developers several times. We've talked to a company who lays out subdivisions, and they've told us they've laid out tracts developments for our property. So our concern is simply that we've raised all of our kids here. All of our dogs are buried in the garden. There's stone walls there. We have an outhouse too. We just want it to be saved. The little house that's there, when we talked to people about it, it's a tenant house. Nobody knows in this generation what a tenant house is. When this was a farm, the couple that lived there, she was the housekeeper for the Nelsons, and he tended the farm. There were cows in the barn. And so it was a working farm, not like it would have been the first 100 years of its existence. But all the other barns in Perry 1, where this is, disappeared almost overnight. And I admit that it needs some paint, but barns like this just don't exist. They've become a very rare commodity. And so this is the little tenant house. When we first bought the property, we were told, well, you need to call the Perry Township Fire Department and have them come out, and they could use it, burn it down, and use it as a test. But we managed to save it. But I'm going on, but this place means a lot to us. And we just want to make sure that this piece of history is saved, or at least preserved for the rest of our lifetimes anyway. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Now we come to council for any questions, either for the petitioners or our presenter, hand staff. Seeing no questions. Oh, Councilmember.
I just thought of one. I was thinking of, I was looking at an aerial view, I guess, yes, Connor, or I should say Mr. Herderick. And it looks like this, we were talking about the preservation of the structures. Of course, the land is preserved as well. So the property is preserved. And it looks very wooded. It looks like there's a lot of trees on the property. Is that the case? Am I interpreting that photo correctly because it was taken in winter?
Some of the trees were there, the Nelsons planted in the 1930s. Others we planted in the 90s. And so there are a lot of trees. It's wooded now. The field to the south, you may be familiar with. That 60-acre field was part of this property up until the Depression, until 1932. It's now part of the Huntington Trust, their estates. I know that people want to try and develop that, but it'll be snowing in July before that happens.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I was referring to the aerial, not these pictures, but the aerial picture, and I see.
But you
now
can see the
Google Maps.
subdivisions right next to
Yeah.
us.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Seeing none, we go to the public. If there are any comments. And seeing none, we are back to council for a final comment and possible move to pass. Councilmember Rollo.
Well, for all the reasons stated, I think this is a good case for preservation, historic preservation. I really appreciate the owners and thinking of austerity and that this deserves protection culturally and because of the structure itself. The reason I asked that question, though, I think it's kind of interesting, and this is sort of apart from the consideration, but we were talking earlier about increasing density, and we look around the city where we might do it. And so looking at the big picture of this, what I see is this is on the periphery of the city. There's a lot of suburbs. But one thing that I noticed very distinctly is that this is on one of the tributaries to Jackson Creek. I mean, just to the south of you, not through your property, but and it's one of the remaining contiguous green corridors through the city. So if maybe next time we can look at Google Maps and you'll see this tributary just runs all the way up to Morgan Monroe, essentially. And so this is a consideration of the Environmental Commission, which is looking to preserve green corridors throughout the city. So it's interesting that this kind of meshes in terms of historic preservation, as well as this is, I think, very good for the environment as well in terms of conservation. That's my comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Granger.
Thank you. I'm excited to support this, and I really appreciate that the owners came forward with this recommendation. I think that speaks a lot to me. I like that. I think the property is beautiful, and I can see how people are clamoring down your throat to take it over, because it is probably a valuable piece of property when you're surrounded by all these other developments. But I think it's a piece of Bloomington history that we can preserve, and I'm hoping you will vote yes as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sturbaum.
Yeah, one of the things that's always fascinated me about history and the value of these properties is that it transcends money in a lot of ways. You know, money wants to drive what happens in the city, and it tries to, and it generally does. But when there's another community value, and that's our community's history, the federal government decided that history could trump money. And that's why we have preservation law, because money was doing everything and it was destroying everything, and it was the ultimate decider. And preservation law said there is another value. There are community values, there are historic values, and these owners recognize that. They could make a lot of money getting rid of this. But this city has a series of these homes, these old farm homes from the 1800s that were the large farms before this city grew. And you'll find them hidden in different subdivisions. You know, they're little jewels when you find them, and then you sort of can think backwards in time from the preservation of those to the pre-development era when the city was a very small city surrounded by these large farms. And once they're gone, they're irreplaceable. They simply are gone. And nobody can read that history when they're gone. You know, people unborn will be able to walk this farm and understand the history of what it was like to live in that era. And if money wants to decide, goodbye all of this stuff. You know, that holds for small neighborhoods, it holds for properties like this. And I just am always thrilled when the human heart, the human values speak like this and transcend our typical monetary, the money decides everything. And I'm just proud of the community for standing up for that, and we have a more rich community because of it. And I want to really thank the owners for understanding that and giving this gift to the future. And I'm very appreciative of that.
Thank you. Councilmember Chopra.
Yes, just briefly, I'll be voting yes because I think this is a perfect example of what preserving a historic place can do for the character of the surrounding neighborhood. I've lived directly across and kind of adjacent to this property, and I'm familiar with it. And it's definitely unique and special. And I like the idea of keeping it there for perpetuity. So thank you very much for coming forth.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. Thank you, Harvey. I appreciate that presentation. And I will support this. What I said earlier, I still think holds with the growth of the city and some of the density issues. And I also said earlier that these can be pretty tough. Now, me personally, I've worked at Indiana University for over 30 years. My main office, our headquarters, is in the Alice Nelson building. Okay, I know part of that. I know that history. I supervise 6 of the dormitories. That the pattern, or that the how it started. Now, that she hadn't seen any of what we're doing now, may not even approve of some of it, but that's how it all started. I like hearing the history as well, starting with the libraries, how we started that. That was also further enhanced by Coach Knight, even further, by spending more money in putting books there before things went south and we went some other way. So I'll be happy to support this. It is very worthy, but I still will maintain that in future conversations, we're going to have to talk about growth and density and surviving, basically. So we will talk about that. But thank you again, Harvey families. Appreciate you taking the time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on council? Councilmember Rupp.
Here's a little bit of related Bloomington history. Who would have thunk, or I would have thunk, that 44 years ago, I guess shortly before the Harveys moved into this house, that I would, 44 years later, be voting on a historic designation for my middle school principals. That makes me feel old or young. That's right.
Ought to make you feel pretty old.
Anyway, I'll be voting yes.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, he's historic. That's it. You feel historic, Andy.
And with that, are we ready for a move, do, pass?
Move, do, pass.
Second. Moved and seconded. Let me start on my right with young Councilmember Ruff.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Enthusiastically, yes.
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 And that is unanimous, 9-0. Thank you so very much. We now move on to our last item tonight, Resolution 1902, to extend the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Zone for an additional 5 years. I'm here to present Mr. Brian Payne. I know, that's a
Hi.
Happy New Year.
I can never get this microphone right. Can you all hear that on cats?
You might want to point that microphone just a little bit more toward you. Yeah, that might help.
How about that?
Let's see.
I'm just going to be hunching every time.
That's
Okay.
fine, that's fine.
That ought to do it.
So I'm Brian Payne, Assistant Director of Small Business Development, Department of Economic and Sustainable Development. It looks like this slideshow is just going through automatically. Can I take 30 seconds and see if I
Sure,
can?
yeah, if you're having technical difficulties.
Well, if you all can handle the borders, I can. Some of the font is going to be a little bit small, so I apologize for that. So we are seeking our 5th renewal of the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Zone. We recently helped lobby for legislation at the state level to make this possibility. All 4 of the previous renewals have passed without exception, and we're seeking the last available renewal for the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Zone under current state law. Still can't move forward on this.
Mr. Payne, can you make your presentation from the desk there?
I sure can.
Why don't you do that? Let's not stand on ceremony. You don't have to be behind the podium.
So hit green light to talk to make sure it's on cap.
I'll click on the right slide.
Okay. It did come up. I'm having issues, but. So you can see before you a map of the urban enterprise zone. The mission is pretty, it's simple, but it's broad to provide the means to improve the economic, physical, and social environment for zone residents and businesses. So under state authority, the zone provides state and local tax incentives and benefits for zone businesses. And in exchange, those zone businesses must remit a portion of those benefits back to the zone in order to fund the activities of the zone. So you can see the map there. It's most of, it does not include the campus of Indiana University. It's most of the downtown corridor. Thank you, Councilmember Volan. Thank Ms. Sims as well. Thank everyone. Nope. It's auto going again. Okay. Well.
Talk fast.
Yeah, talk fast, right? So
it'll come back around again. Just keep talking.
I don't mean to have it on a timer, but it sure is going on a timer.
Yeah, it's on a timer.
Mr. Payne, perhaps you could you just go through and describe it and then send us the presentation?
I'm happy to, yeah.
And then you could do it next time.
It's much less visually impressive than I'm sure the Harvey Nelson Historic Neighborhood presentation would have been. So we talked about how we work. The governance structure, so the BUEA is an independent 501c3 organization. It's appointed based on specific designated roles under the Indiana Code. So there are 12 people on the board. However, 2 of those are gubernatorial seats that the governor has never elected to appoint. So there's 6 mayoral seats, 4 seats are appointed by the council, and 3 of those must be zone residents, 3 must be business representatives of zone businesses, 1 has to be an organized labor rep, someone from the Planning Commission, the ESD director, and then a council member. The current board of directors is listed on the presentation, but it's Julie Donham from German American Bank as the chair, Jane Cooper-Smith from Hopscotch as the vice chair. At some point, that will cycle through. Councilmember Sturbaum is the council representative. So the history of the Enterprise Zone Program for at least the next 5 seconds. The Enterprise Zone Program was established in 1983, and it was housed under the state IEDC, which is essentially the state version of ESD, for the last 25 years. And under the state legislation that was passed last year, it will be, IEDC will no longer have a role, and that transfers to the designating municipal body. So changes to the zone and approvals that we would formally have to seek from this body and IEDC will simply be from Common Council now. So the zones are designated based on demographic, socioeconomic, and geographic size criteria. The statute stipulates what kind of mix that they have to have in their commercial, industrial, and residential activities. The legislation allows for the zone boundaries to be changed, but we feel that would be confusing, so we're not asking for a zone boundary change at this time. UEAs, Urban Enterprise Associations, there are 15 to 20 of them across the state. They're tasked with coordinating zone development activities, catalyzing development within the zone, promoting the zone to outside groups and causing business to come within the zone, and liaising with zone businesses and residents. So we're on. You can switch if you're doing it. I appreciate it, Doris. Nope, we went backwards. There you go. We went forwards. So business benefits available to zone businesses. There's a variety of zone businesses benefits available. You can see that's an example of a historic facade grant. That's the ongoing project at the Trojan Horse. So the enterprise zone investment deductions themselves are benefits, right? So anybody seeking to develop real personal property in the zone can take advantage of those deductions, and as can council members, and admittedly myself, I should make that own conflict of interest disclosure. Wage earners who both live and work in the zone can get a tax deduction as well. So those are benefits unto themselves, as well as the source of funding for the BUEA. We also fund entrepreneurial support and technical assistance. We have an annual contribution to both the Ivy Tech Cook Center for Entrepreneurship and the Indiana Small Business Development Center. And then we provide business loans as well to small businesses. We haven't initiated new loans in a while, but we have several ongoing loans. As I said, we do the historic facade preservation grants. There's a separate slide on those that I'll get to in a second. We do $40,000 worth of zone arts grants every year, which is a competitive grant process where we try to identify emerging artists to perform and install art exhibits within the zone to help drive culture and development and make the zone a more beautiful place to live and drive quality of place. We work with the Arts Commission to help evaluate those grant applications. And then we have business scholarships that are available to small business owners. There's a lifetime limit of $1,200, and those are available to attend conferences, seek licenses, certifications. Recently, the B Corp received one to go to an almond conference in California, and they doubled their customer base strictly from going to that conference. And then we've also made some major grants over the course of the BUEA's history. So in 2015 to 2016, there was two specific $150,000 and $200,000 grants made to what was then Martha's House and the Shalom Center in order to keep that organization or that venture afloat. And then recently, the board authorized a $1 million capitalization of the CDFI-friendly Bloomington project that was just actually formally created as a 501c3 last month, and will be making an announcement of their activities, hiring an executive director and moving forward in the next year. So those are some of the business benefits. For residents, obviously if they're a wage earner from his own business, there's a very good tax deduction that's described below. There are also economic independence scholarships for residents who seek to make themselves more marketable and more employable. Typically, these go to people taking classes at Ivy Tech or IU, but they can take any sort of class that they want to make themselves more marketable and increase their economic independence. There's a similar lifetime limit as the business scholarships. Slide, sorry. Thank you. Historic facade preservation grants. So the BUEA budgets $50,000 annually, although that's flexible. If we had enough good applications, I think we would go beyond that. For businesses to rehabilitate and preserve historic facades in the urban enterprise zone, we typically seek at least a 1-to-1 match from the property owner. They are awarded by the BUEA Board of Directors, but Connor and the previous historic preservation managers actually do a ton of work working with applicants to make sure we receive good applications at the BUEA. And some recent examples are the Trojan Horse that's ongoing, the Treasure Chest, which is at 122 South College Avenue, the Batman House was renovated, and the new Lotus headquarters received a grant as well. So other ongoing programs and projects, every year we give approximately $30,000 to the Community School Foundation. Every year they have some curriculum experts and teachers come in and make a pitch for what they want to do with that money. They've done things like a station for kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities to stay, take some time out, play with things, and then restore themselves. They've bought new math kits. They've bought supplies for the robotics club, to name a few. We talked about the art grants. Special projects we talked about, and we make an annual contribution to the Boys and Girls Club to sponsor Lemonade Day, which is an annual event that teaches kids in middle school and elementary school about entrepreneurship by teaching them how to do a lemonade stand. Thank you. So we talked about enterprise zone investment deductions that are both a benefit to businesses in the zone and the source of the BUEA's funding. So an EZID allows a deduction of the increase in the assessed value of property or equipment due to either new construction or substantial rehab, or the retooling of manufacturing equipment. This is almost always real property development, but we do have some personal property as well from advanced manufacturing groups and a great coffee machine at Hopscotch. So it allows a 100% tax abatement over a 10-year period. In exchange, the applicant owes a 20% membership fee to the BUEA, which is the lowest statutorily allowed fee that we can charge under the state statute. Some enterprise associations charge up to 49%. As passed by the council in 2013, if that deduction takes place in the TIF, it must go to council for approval, and if it is approved, they owe an additional 9% to the Redevelopment Commission to ensure the TIF stays afloat. And then every recipient of an EZID owes a 1% processing fee, which for the last 30 years went to the state. Now it's going to go to the Association of Indiana Enterprise Zones, of which Bloomington is a member. The tax deductions are filed annually with the county auditor, so they're not discretionary. If you apply and you meet the eligibility requirements, you simply file the form and you get the tax deduction. So an example is if there's a lot or a property with a current assessed value of $100,000, they make improvements that increase the value by $50,000. You apply the 2.12%, which would be, I think, Perry Township this year, tax rate. Their property tax due before the deduction would be $3,100. That would go down by about $1,000 due to the deduction. They owe us 20% of those savings as a BUEA fee, so that, in that example, they'd write a $226 check to the BUEA for the first 10 years of their abatement. So I apologize for the small font on this. We had a council member request some information about the BUEA finances. So the top table on the right is an example of how many businesses get EZIDs, participate in the program, the fees that they pay in aggregate, and then the assessed value covered, right? So not the amount of the deduction, but the amount of increases in assessed value cumulatively that receive EZIDs every single year. So the bottom right table is simply a snapshot of the 2018 budget as it was spent by the BUEA. On the left, the bank accounts currently spread across several different local banks amount to $2.5 million in BUEA holdings. That is before we have not yet dispersed the $1 million capitalization to the CDFI-friendly Bloomington organizations. That will go down significantly. But as of the new year, they were at $2.5 million. In 2018, we had $229,000 in expenditures. That does not include the $1 million, right? So it would be, once that goes through, about $1.3 million. This is the first year that the BUEA has spent more than it took in. So for the last 5 years, net revenue has exceeded $100,000, going as high as $400,000, where we take in a bunch of tax diverted money, and we have not found projects large enough to fund. In 2018, for example, we received $560,000 in actual deposits, which would give us, if not for the $1 million one-time purchase, would have given us a net revenue of over $300,000. Oh, slide. Sorry, SJ. So the request we're asking for was authorized by state legislation last year. We'd like to extend the enterprise zone for an additional 5-year period. The BUEA exists independent of the existence of the zone as long as it has funding and wants to exist. But for the 2008 tax year, we could not receive new or issue new investment deductions. We actually won't be able to issue the wage deduction, so none of us will get the wage deduction on our taxes next year because of that expiration of the zone. If we renew the zone, that can continue, but existing EZIDs, so people who are in the process of their 10-year abatement, continue to receive those even with the expiration of the zone. So it expired on January 31st, 2018. We'd like to renew it retroactively starting January 1st for simplicity, and that renewal would end at the end of 2023. So the enterprise zone is not renewable beyond the state under current law. Given the state agency's decision to remove themselves from processing the program, I do not imagine that they're interested in getting back into it, and there are no plans I know of at this time to extend that. Focus has gone elsewhere. Fort Wayne is part of a pilot program to do innovation districts, which are a little bit more knowledge-based and tech-focused. So I don't anticipate this program being extended as is further than 2023, but that's speculative. So in conclusion, this would allow zone businesses to continue to claim those wage deductions, to continue to benefit employees that live and work in the zone, initiate new deductions to spur development, and sustain the BUEA's funding source and those benefits to businesses for another 5 years. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Questions from council? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, it all went rather quickly. Can we get your PowerPoint? mailed to the
Yeah,
council?
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. But specifically, the slide, I think it was the one immediately previous to this, where it had the balances and such. So that $1,051,000 in outstanding commitments, does that include the $1 million for CDFI?
Yeah, good point. So that includes the one-time CDFI capitalization, and then typically there's a carryover from fiscal year to fiscal year of between $40,000 to $100,000, and what that is competitive grants like the Zone Arts grants are awarded in August of 2018, and then recipients are able to conduct their activities and get reimbursed for the next calendar year. So the arts grants we gave out in 2018 will be conducted over the calendar year 2019, and then they seek reimbursement from the BUEA. So we've made those commitments to fund that money, but we won't until people hold their festivals and hold their concerts and then submit reimbursement at the end. We won't actually disperse the funds. So that's the rest of the money is from those sources, and the $1 million is the CDFI. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone to my left? Question? Councilmember Granger. Sorry.
Thank you. You said BUEA does loans, and I'm just wondering how much of loans outstanding, what's the balance for outstanding loans?
How much is the BUEA owed? I don't have the exact figure. I'm happy to get it for you. I believe it's in the neighborhood of $50,000. So typically the loans are in small amounts, $50,000 to $100,000, and at interest rates of 0 to 0.25%, right? It's very beneficial to the business, but good question.
So do you do these every year, or?
So in the past, the BUEA was in the business of giving out these small business loans. Prior to my tenure, I believe, and Councilmember Sturbaum can probably elaborate, the decision was made to get out of the actual loan, the lending role, because we don't have the capacity to process and maintain those loans effectively. And the BUEA too often was getting held without collateral and losing money.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a question? Councilmember Sturbaum.
So I heard no tax credit this year.
Right, so the expiration of the zone, my understanding from our legal analysts and from folks at the state is that that means we will not get a wage deduction, and neither will the employers get a wage deduction for the 2018 tax year.
So if the worker didn't have to live in the zone, they just had to work in the zone?
It has to be both, right?
Has to be both.
Yep, so for employees that live and work in the zone, the employee can get a wage deduction, so it's either up to $7,500 or half their AGI if they don't make that much, and the employer can get one as well.
Right, and didn't we give to Boys and Girls Club as well? That was a couple years ago, it seems. The rebuilding project of the Boys and Girls Club.
It is possible that the BUEA gave a one-time donation to the Boys and Girls Club, of which I'm not aware.
And that,
Not during my tenure, certainly, but
Right.
prior to it.
and was that before you were here when we granted that to Martha's House and the transition to Shalom? That was quite a large grant.
That was between the years of 2015 and 2016. I got here in June of 2017.
Right, and the schools are all in the zone or proportionally they draw from the zone.
That's a good point. I should have made that in my presentation. So the money to the Foundation of Community Schools has to be used at schools that are either in the zone or have a large percentage of students in the zone, and they will detail for us every year how many students are in the zone, what percentage it is, why they're spending that money on their chosen programs.
Right, okay, thank you.
Additional questions from council? All right, seeing none, we go to the public. If there's anyone here that wishes to speak to the BUEA? And seeing none, we are back to council for final comments. Councilmember Chopra.
Yes, I served on the BUA prior to my term on council, and I remember the idea of the association sunsetting, and I didn't like it. And I know that there were some options out there that we could have considered, such as turning it into a nonprofit or some sort of foundation or something with the funds, but I'm glad that we don't need to do that. I'm really happy that all the good things that this association does, which is often not reported or appreciated, can go on. I hope that my council colleagues can vote yes eventually on this decision because it makes a big impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments from council?
Well, I may say that certainly the benefits to the community that the BUA has afforded, including the ability to support Martha's House as it was foundering and support for Shalom, who took it over, and it's now the Friends Place. Those were significant use of funds that were certainly of community benefit. I will be certainly curious to keep my eye on what may develop after this 5 years, once I'm sure we'll be in favor of approving this. You mentioned it, innovation districts. I would like to get a little bit of a sneak preview, if at all possible, as to what that might look like and what additional programs the state may, in their ultimate wisdom, decide would be a benefit to communities like ours. Councilmember Volan, did you have a comment?
No, I just want to call move to pass.
Oh, okay.
Move to pass.
Move to pass. Second. All right. Let me start again to my left with Councilmember Rallo.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And that is also unanimous, 9-1. Thank you very
9-0.
much. 9-0. And thank you very much, Mr. Payne. And we will move to adjourn. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you all. Can I get a witness?